Chapter 13:12. He had long heard that his brother's unit had been completely annihilated by an unknown force. When this company commander had set off, he had been warned repeatedly that if he encountered any danger, he had to protect himself at the first possible moment. Once he confirmed that the enemy was behind him, he had to immediately send out a distress signal. Thus, he immediately set up a defensive formation. The 100 soldiers all held their weapons and stared nervously in the direction of the horse hooves. Not only the soldiers, but even among the 200 civilians, there were a few young and strong men who took the bows and spears handed over by the soldiers of the 5-star army. They were prepared to fight to the death to protect themselves. Only the elderly, children, and women among the civilians had nervous expressions. They didn't know what was waiting for them. While waiting, every minute and second felt like an eternity. Just when everyone felt that their palms were covered in sweat, the enemy cavalry finally appeared. It was a group of 200 cavalry that didn't look like the Biming army's uniform at all. They were like a train speeding along the train tracks. As soon as they appeared, they quickly approached the small transport team. They didn't have any intention of greeting them. The moment they appeared, they were filled with killing intent. It's the enemy. The company commander quickly made a judgment. Then, he reached into his bosom, and a cylinder appeared in his hand. He quickly pulled it open. Tong! A burst of colorful flames soared into the sky after an explosion. This was the signal for help in a critical situation. When a signal was sent out, the company commander's eyes were filled with killing intent. He was already prepared to fight to the death. He was very clear that with the strength of his company, it was impossible for all of them to be a match for the enemy cavalry. However, he couldn't escape. The only thing he could do was to pin down the enemy and wait for reinforcements to arrive. Dong Ping appeared. The distance of 3 kilometers could be said to be covered in the blink of an eye. At this moment, his eyes revealed a look of disdain and complacency. The 5-star army's fighting strength had always been powerful. However, that was only for the elite troops. This new army that was responsible for transporting food hadn't been established for long. Moreover, half of them were cavalry and half of them were foot soldiers. Many of them hadn't even been on the battlefield and hadn't even seen blood before. They only relied on their youthful strength and empty strength. How could such an army be a match for their elite, Liaodong, Iron Cavalry? Dong Ping had already started to consider how he was going to eat his fill after plundering the rations of these carriages. He didn't place the 105-star army and 200 commoners in his eyes at all. So what if they were prepared? In the face of his cavalry, wouldn't they have to stretch out their necks and wait to be slaughtered? So what if they sent out a distress signal? In at most a quarter of an hour, Dong Ping was confident that he would be able to kill everyone in front of him, snatch the food, and run away. At that time, in the vast grassland, who could do anything to him? Once he entered the forest, he wouldn't be afraid even if there were thousands or tens of thousands of 5-star soldiers. His body exuded confidence, and his eyes carried a relaxed smile. In Dong Ping's eyes, this battle was as simple and easy as a hunt. He only needed to open his bloody mouth, and victory would be his. The 200 cavalrymen on the other side came closer and closer. When they could clearly see the viciousness of the other side, the company commander gave the order to shoot. At the same time, he brought the remaining 50 cavalrymen and charged forward. If the cavalrymen wanted to display their advantage, they had to charge forward. The man borrowed the horse's momentum and the blade's speed to display the strongest power. If they just stood there and chopped, it would be like not using bean buns as rations and not using the village chief as a leader. Xiao, 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 xiao. The arrows came from afar, but Biming's Liaodong Iron Cavalry were already prepared. They only needed to dodge and block to easily avoid the arrows. Other than 1 or 2 unlucky ones who were injured by the arrows, no one died. This was because Biming's Liaodong Iron Cavalry were well trained, and because the 5-star army had too few archers. There were only 50 of them, so they weren't of much use. Kill! With a loud shout, the company commander swung his saber to the side. Although the situation wasn't good and death was inevitable, he still had to give it his all before he died. Even if he could only kill 1 person, it would be worth it. Ding, ding, dang, dang. What followed was the sound of weapons clashing. It was like the bell signaling the end of a class. The cavalrymen fell from their horses one after another, just like students jumping out of class. 50 against 200 ordinary soldiers against elite veterans. In just one exchange, more than half of the 5-star army soldiers died. Less than 20 of the original 50 cavalrymen were left. The company commander's left arm already had a bloody wound. Under his strength, the blood flowed even faster and soon dyed half of his clothes red. He didn't care about this at all. He had already injured an enemy, so what he wanted to do now was to increase his victory and kill 1 or 2 people. It could be considered finding a companion in the afterlife. Kill! After another loud shout, the company commander brandished his saber and charged forward. Beside him were less than 20 cavalrymen who were lucky enough to survive. Kill! Dongping was also shocked by the company commander's imposing manner. After the previous round of charging, one of his men was actually killed and 7 others were injured. This result greatly angered him. He was leading the elite cavalrymen that Biming had spent a lot of money to train. The other party was just a young recruit who had undergone a short period of training. Even if there were 100 of them, they shouldn't be exchanged for the life of one of his brothers. Now that one of them had died, he was furious. He felt that his dignity was being challenged. Next, he wanted to carry out the fiercest revenge. He wanted to let these damned 5-star army soldiers know that provoking him wouldn't have a good ending. Under 2 loud shouts, the 2 sides clashed again. What followed was another wave of swordlight. More than 10 cavalrymen fell to the ground and were buried here. Ha ha! A loud laugh came from the company commander's mouth. This time, he finally managed to kill an enemy with his own hands, but the price he paid was a bone-deep wound under his ribs. However, he didn't care anymore. What he wanted was to kill enough people. That way, even if he died, he could look up to the sky and laugh. Dongping's expression became even worse. In the second round of charging, although he killed 13 of his opponents, his side had 2 dead and 3 injured. Looking at the cavalryman formation that only had 6 people, he gritted his teeth and said word by word, "Kill. Kill them all. Don't leave a single one alive. Kill." The other Biming Liaodong cavalrymen were also full of hatred. The ordinary 5-star army soldiers that they regarded as ants actually dared to fight back. They actually killed 3 of their men and injured several others. This was a disgrace. They had to kill all of their enemies to prove that they were a strong army. Both sides were full of anger. Killing intent filled every part of their body. Everyone knew that they would fight until the end. In the end, only one team would be standing here, and that team must be the Biming Liaodong cavalrymen. Shio, shio, shio. The sound of air breaking suddenly came from afar. Not far from where the 2 sides were fighting, a team of 10 cavalrymen appeared. They were the scouts that immediately rushed over after receiving the news. This team of 10 had been hiding in the dense forest all this time. According to the military order, they did not have any direct scouting mission. Their most important task was to slow down the enemy's escape once they appeared. After waiting for a month and being bitten countless times by mosquitoes, they finally had the chance to attack. 10 elite veterans that were selected from various armies rushed out. They finally arrived at the battlefield at the last moment. 10 arrows were shot out. They pierced through the air and attacked the Biming Liaodong cavalrymen from the side. Unfortunately, because the distance was too far, the arrows fell to the ground halfway and did not cause any damage to the enemy. Ha! Dongping and his subordinates could not help but laugh when they saw this scene. They were surprised by the 5-star army's quick reaction. However, only 10 cavalrymen came. Moreover, they had such poor archery skills. This made them relax. These people were not worthy of being called their opponents. You guys go and take care of them. After laughing, Dongping did not care about these 10 cavalrymen at all. He casually pointed at a squad leader and asked him to lead the team. The squad leader had 9 soldiers under him. He immediately agreed, and the 10 of them, including himself, went to meet the 10 cavalrymen. They smiled and waited for their prey to enter the net. Then, they would show their cruelest side and kill them. Dongping was not in a hurry to make a move. He wanted to let these five-star army soldiers who dared to draw their swords at him see how he would kill them one by one. The feeling of despair must be very fun and interesting. They're here, facing the 10 Beiming Liaodong cavalrymen who were wearing Mongolian uniforms. The squad leader of the 10 cavalrymen, Zhang Zhou, said softly. When he said this, there was not the slightest trace of nervousness on his face. On the contrary, he looked eager to give it a try. Zhang Zhou used to be a deputy battalion commander in the new Second Army. Although the disciplinary investigation group did not find anything wrong with him, he could not stay in the new Second Army anymore. Therefore, he came to the logistics division and waited to take up a position in another army. In the end, because of his good performance, he caught Su Yunxing's eye and became a soldier in the reconnaissance division. Zhang Zhou, who had been on the battlefield and had seen blood, did not completely change after a period of learning as a reconnaissance division. His personal ability had indeed more than doubled. He had always wanted to show off what he had learned. Now that the opportunity had come, the long-awaited battlefield made his hormones rise. He could not wait to perform well. Chapter 13:13. Zhang Zhou was not the only one who was excited. The 9 squad members beside him were also very excited. Warriors who could become scouts were all veterans who had been through hundreds of battles. They had potential that others did not have. In addition to what they had learned during this period of time, they were eager to perform well and see how much they had improved. The 10 soldiers with different expectations slowly approached. They did not show the slightest bit of fear when facing the 10 enemy cavalrymen. Even though there were close to 200 cavalrymen behind these cavalrymen staring at them like tigers and wolves, they were still fearless. You have some guts, but I don't know if you can maintain your composure under my cavalry sword. Charge! The squad leader yelled and led 9 cavalrymen to charge forward. Although there were only 10 cavalrymen, they still gave off a sense of majesty. Spread out. Facing the cavalrymen who were charging more than 200 meters away, Zhou Hao gave the order the moment the enemy moved. Then, the 10 soldiers separated and each occupied a position within a limited time. It felt like they were fighting alone, but also like some kind of formation. Shoot the arrows. As soon as they finished moving, Zhou Hao shouted. His voice was like the roar of a tiger and the roar of a dragon, spreading far and wide. Dongping and the others were not far away heard it and laughed out loud. The effectiveness of a cavalryman's bow depended on the distance. If the distance was too close, then the bow and arrow would be almost useless. It was all because the enemy was already in front of you while you were raising the bow. How could you block it? This was also the reason why Dongping and the others laughed. However, their laughter came to an abrupt stop. They all stood there as if they were frozen, in their line of sight. Every single one of the 10 cavalrymen had a trembling arrow resting on their chest. After struggling for a while, the 10 of them fell to the ground one by one, like ducks being chased into the water. They actually hit the target. In a short period of time, 10 arrows hit the target. This result was really shocking. Dongping and the others were dumbfounded. How could they have known that archery was a necessary skill for a qualified scout? Division Commander Su Yunxing had put in a lot of effort in this regard. After he received the full support of Commander Yang Si, he spent a lot of material and financial resources to finally double the archery skills of the 2,000 scouts under his command. They might not be able to hit every shot, but at such a close distance, hitting the enemy's chest would not be a problem. Just now, the 10 of them had spread out in preparation for the archery. What was different from the past was that these 10 people did not choose the person closest to them when shooting. This was because in many cases, the closer the distance, the higher the accuracy. Humans are alive, but they can move and dodge. It was because of these factors that Su Yunxing's strategy was to shoot at random. Don't think that I will shoot at you just because you're close to me. If you think this way and dodge according to my arrow, then you're making a big mistake and falling into my trap. Because I'm shooting at the person beside you, and the person beside me is shooting at you. In this way, it was really impossible to guard against. A cavalryman could instinctively dodge one person's arrow, but they couldn't dodge multiple people at once. This was why they fell into the trap. This was because their dodging actions were useless. They even got the wrong target. So how could they dodge successfully? Under one shot, the 10 Biming cavalrymen who were not familiar with this strategy all fell to the ground. Perhaps some of them would not die immediately, but they would still be breathing more than they were exhaling. They did not have much time left to live. Yeah. Accompanied by Dong Ping and the others' surprise and confusion, Zhou Zhou's 10 people cheered loudly. Speaking of which, they had only tried this strategy on the Scarecrow. This was the first time they had actually killed an enemy on the battlefield. They never thought that they would get the jackpot. How could they not be happy? At this moment, only the cheers of Zhou Zhou and the others could be heard on the battlefield. Everyone else was stunned in place. They were all shocked by the scene in front of them. The company commander, who only had 5 soldiers with him, seemed to have forgotten his situation. He also forgot the despair in his eyes when he saw that there were only 10 reinforcements. The hope of survival rose in his heart once again. This is courting death. I will kill all of you. I will capture all of you and torture you to death bit by bit. Above, Dong Ping finally reacted. When he saw the 10 cavalrymen on the ground, his whole body emitted a cold aura. In the past, when they were carrying out missions, the mission would be considered a failure if one of them died. But now, 13 of them had died. Even if he killed the 5-star army and the civilians in front of him, he would still be punished when he returned. If he did not do well, he might even be punished and demoted. When he thought of General Fong Dingshan's cruel military law, Dong Ping felt his whole body turn cold. He needed to vent his anger. His target was the 10 5-star army soldiers who suddenly appeared. Under the command of above, 50 cavalrymen walked out in a row. Obviously, after experiencing the failure just now, these Biming army soldiers did not want to fight one-on-one anymore. They wanted to fight with numbers. The 50 cavalrymen slowly came forward and gradually formed their encirclement. It was as if they were saying, "We want to surround you, capture you alive, and slowly torture you to death." This is a competition of numbers. Zhang Zhou looked at the 50 cavalrymen who were gradually approaching and shook his head. Then he looked back. When he turned back, his eyes were incomparably calm. "Sai, if we really want to compete in numbers, you guys are not a match." As if to prove Zhang Zhou's words, after he finished speaking, more and more black dots appeared behind him. The rumbling sound of horse hooves resounded on the ground again. After the battle, just now, more and more cavalrymen from the reconnaissance division had gathered here. 1 squad, 2 squads, 5 squads, 10 squads. In just a short period of time, more and more black dots appeared in all directions. With a rough glance, the number of people was probably more than 500. This sudden change fell into Dong Ping's eyes. In a short period of time, his eyes were constantly changing. He was actually surrounded. This was impossible. Before the battle, his 4 scouts had already scouted the surroundings and did not find any traces of the 5-star army. What was going on? There were too many questions in his heart. Even though Dong Ping wanted to get to the bottom of this, there was no time for him to think about it. They absolutely could not be surrounded. Otherwise, once their identities were exposed, who knew what kind of impact it would bring to Northern Ming? The reason why they pretended to be Mongolian cavalrymen was because they did not have the courage to face the 5-star army head-on. "Quick, let's rush out. Let's rush out before they surround us," Dong Ping shouted loudly. Then he whipped his horse and charged out in the direction where he thought the encirclement was the weakest. Kill! Seeing that Dong Ping was about to escape, the first person to react was the company commander who only had 5 soldiers with him. His own reinforcements had arrived. His morale was greatly boosted. He wanted to avenge his fallen comrades. The company commander and his 5 soldiers moved. But what was strange was that only they moved. The scouts that surrounded them did not attack, nor did they run. Instead, they stayed where they were. Some took out bows and arrows, some took out horse ropes, and all of them leisurely looked at the Biming army who were running in all directions. How to attack the enemy when they were still was one of the training courses for scouts. To them, this was a small matter, as simple as eating and drinking. Dong Ping did not know this. When he saw that the 5-star army soldiers did not stop him, he thought that they were afraid and ran even faster. He urged his horse to gallop, as if he was afraid that the enemy would suddenly turn around and attack him. Attack! Someone in the crowd shouted first. Then, bows and arrows, horse ropes, and other objects flew out. Some of the bolder ones directly jumped on the beaming soldiers closest to them. It was obvious that they wanted to capture them alive. More and more scouts arrived in the encirclement, but none of them charged forward. They also did not have the intention to swarm forward. Those who came late stood at the periphery. Like this, the encirclement became wider and wider. It gave people a feeling that they could not see the end of the encirclement. Dongping's luck was not bad. He dodged the bows and arrows, and even dodged 2 horse ropes. He was running further and further away. However, the soldiers beside him were not so lucky. When the 5-star army soldiers suddenly appeared, and when their numbers increased, their morale dropped to the freezing point. They no longer had the will to fight, and the only thing left was to run away. However, this wish was hard to fulfill. In the process of running away, they were pulled off their horses one after another. Cries of pain could be heard from time to time. "Quick, leave this place. This is a trap." Dongping constantly encouraged himself. Although he did not know how the 5-star army discovered him and formed such an encirclement, he knew one thing. However, there was one thing that he was clear about. If he stayed here, he would likely suffer a fate worse than death. Good luck could not envelop a person forever. Just as Dongping was charging outwards on his warhorse under the protection of the remaining 2 bodyguards, his body suddenly turned sluggish. Under the powerful force, his entire body fell off his warhorse. The moment he fell, he did not know when the horse he was riding on had been caught by the horse rope. This was also the reason why he fell from his horse. With a plop, Dongping fell from his galloping warhorse. At this moment, Dongping felt as if all the bones in his body had been broken. Pain filled his entire body, making him feel as if being able to take a deep breath had become an extravagant hope. Even so, Dongping did not forget his situation. If he continued to walk, the pain would be unbearable. However, if he did not leave now, he was afraid that he would suffer 100 or 1,000 times more pain. That was what he could not accept. Chapter 13-14. He forced himself to sit up straight, then held his breath and jogged forward. He wanted to escape from this place. He didn't want to die. Swoosh! Dongping, who was running, once again felt his knees. The first thing he felt his knees was a lasso rope around his feet. Dongping, who had fallen, felt as if his chest had been smashed by a heavy hammer, making it increasingly difficult for him to breathe. However, the hope of survival still made him force himself to sit up. He reached out his hand and touched his ankle. He wanted to untie the lasso rope and regain his freedom. Do you still want to struggle? The person who caught Dongping was Captain Liyun, who had just arrived. He rode on a warhorse and looked at the struggling Dongping with great interest. Then, with a smile on his face, he let out a frivolous shout. He dismounted his warhorse and immediately galloped forward with all his might. Dongping, who was in the middle of untying the rope, only felt a strong force coming at him. Then his whole body was pulled away. He followed behind his warhorse and lay flat on the grass, allowing the newly grown weeds to continuously rub against his back. Dongping had only been dragged out for 50 meters, but he had already left a long trail of blood on the ground. Dongping was already riddled with scars after being tossed around again and again. Blood had dyed his clothes red, especially the part of his back that was in close contact with the grass. His buttocks had long been scraped open, and a layer of skin had already peeled off. Since Dongping was captured, none of the 200 Beiming cavalrymen escaped. In the end, they were all gathered together. Among them, there were 103 corpses and 97 captives. Division Commander Su Yunxing appeared. With the rank of senior colonel, he appeared very mighty and spirited. Not bad. Looking at the results of the battle, Su Yunxing was very gratified. This was the first time they had taken down all the enemies. More importantly, none of the scouts died. Only 7 of them suffered some light injuries during the battle. They will be good men again after recuperating. Find out who they are. Find out where the other accomplices are hiding. Then, report the results to Logistics Commander Yang. Su Yunsheng was no longer interested in looking at the captives. In his eyes, these people no longer posed any threat. There are only two outcomes waiting for them. Those who cooperated would live, and those who resisted would die. 97 wounded captives were gathered together. Under the watchful eyes of the cavalry scouts, they knelt in a row, as if they were prisoners waiting to be judged. After Zhang Zhou received the task of interrogation, he strode over to the first northern Ming cavalryman kneeling on the ground with a ghost-headed saber in his hand and asked in a booming voice, "Speak. Who are you?" Facing Zhang Zhou's question, the cavalryman straightened his neck and raised his head in disdain. "If you want to kill me, just kill me. Why are you spouting so much nonsense? At most, I'll be a good man again after 18 years. All right." Zhang Zhou was not angry at such an answer. Instead, he was happy. "I like tough guys, but I hope you can continue to be tough." As soon as he finished speaking, he raised his saber. When it fell again, a bloody arm flew into the air. With a single slash, he chopped off one of his arms. Blood splattered everywhere, and the intense pain caused the Baiming cavalryman to cry out in pain before he fainted. "You fainted just like that? Boring." Seeing that the Baiming cavalryman in front of him was so weak, Zhang Zhou shook his head in disappointment. He raised his saber again, and a fresh head was separated from the body. "Sai, he's already fainted. There's no need to interrogate him. Why don't we just kill him?" Zhang Zhou muttered to himself as he walked up to the second person. His face was calm as usual. It was as if he didn't kill a person, but a chicken. Seeing Zhang Zhou walk up to him with his saber still dripping with blood, the second Baiming cavalryman's expression changed again and again. With the previous example, his heart was in a mess. Speak. That would be betrayal. If he didn't speak, he would die. It was very likely that he wouldn't die quickly. What choice should he make? Zhang Zhou didn't give the cavalryman much time to think. To Zhang Zhou, there were a total of 97 captives. Even if half of them died, it didn't matter. In the end, as long as one of them spoke, it would be fine. He believed that among these 97 captives, there would always be someone who was afraid of death. "It's your turn. Same question. What do you want to say?" Zhang Zhou's voice was very normal. It was as simple and casual as a commoner asking if they had eaten. I. Just as the cavalryman was hesitating, the ghost-head saber fell again, and another arm flew into the air. Before it landed, Zhang Zhou's hellish voice sounded. "You're actually a stutterer. How boring." "No, I'm not a stutterer." The cavalryman who lost an arm shouted loudly, but it was the last sound he made in his life. The ghost-head saber fell again, and another head was separated from the body. After killing 2 people, Zhang Zhou didn't have any intention of stopping. Compared to these people who attacked the 5-star army and killed innocent civilians, what he did wasn't excessive at all. He took a step forward and arrived in front of the third person. With the example of the first 2 captives, this person was so scared that he lost control of his bladder. When he saw that the person who came was a devil who killed without batting an eyelid, he was completely terrified. Without asking, he took the initiative to say, "We are the Baiming Liaodong Heavy Cavalry, Pooh." The ghost-head saber fell again, and an arm flew into the air. This scene frightened the other 94 captives. What? Did he still have to die after answering the question? Just as everyone looked at Zhang Zhou, wondering what was going on, an awkward expression appeared on Zhang Zhou's face. Sorry, my hand slipped. I'm used to it." You won't die anymore," Zhang Zhou said apologetically to the cavalryman of Baiming who lost an arm and was rolling on the ground in pain. Pain, unbearable pain, intense pain. Even so, the cavalryman of Baiming didn't dare to faint because he didn't know whether he would lose his value or die if he fainted. "Well, you're not bad. Men, take him away and bandage him properly. I hope he doesn't die," Zhang Zhou ordered his team members. Then, he went to the fourth person. "The question has changed. How many people did you bring this time? Where are they?" With Zhang Zhou, the god of death, the captive soldiers were very cooperative. They all told Zhang Zhou everything they knew. Even the injured Dong Ping was very cooperative. He even revealed his identity and said that he was the leader of the cavalrymen of Baiming. He even said that he was willing to lead the five-star army to take care of the Baiming Liaodong heavy cavalry hidden in the mountains to atone for his crimes. According to Su Yunxing's instructions, the results were quickly sent to the logistics headquarters via telegram. Yang Si took the results to the headquarters of the new army. The 102nd and 103rd Divisions moved out and went straight to the few forests that Dong Ping and the others had told them about. Surround this place. Prepare the kerosene and burn it. After tens of thousands of cavalrymen surrounded the forest, the commander of the 103rd Division, Qin Feng, ordered his men to start a fire attack. In the forest, 5,000 Liaodong heavy cavalry were hiding. The leader was the deputy general of the Baiming heavy cavalry, Luo Baiquan. Considering that there were too many people for a sneak attack, Luo Baiquan only brought 10,000 cavalrymen this time in order to hide himself better. Originally, everything was going smoothly. They could even eat the food they stole and be self-sufficient. Just when Luo Baiquan wanted to use the battle to support the five-star army, the situation suddenly changed. The scouts reported that tens of thousands of five-star army soldiers appeared outside the forest they were hiding in. He had a bad feeling in his heart, but in order to calm the soldiers down, Luo Baiquan said indifferently, "It's fine. Even if they know we are here, they can't do anything to us in the forest." Luo Baiquan was very confident. However, unexpectedly, the five-star army didn't have any intention of charging into the forest. Instead, they used the most primitive and most direct method of attack, fire attack. On the grasslands, there are many forests, valleys, and hills. Especially the forests, because the environment was well protected, there wasn't a problem of random logging. Dense forests could be seen everywhere. This was the main reason for the instability. However, even if they knew this was the case, they couldn't do anything. They couldn't burn the entire forest, right? If they did, what would they do when they needed firewood to build houses? However, if they had enough information, it wouldn't be a problem to burn only one place. Just like now, the fire was only aimed at the hiding place of the Baiming cavalry. When the smoke rose, all sorts of birds and animals in the forest ran out. Not long after, the Baiming cavalry also charged out. Luo Baiquan couldn't allow his brothers to be suffocated or burned to death. Although he knew that there was a large group of five-star army archers waiting for him outside, he had no other choice. Other than charging out, there was no other way. When they rushed out, Luo Baiquan had also played a trick. He had divided the 5,000 people into 20 groups. The larger groups had 1,000 people, while the smaller groups only had a few hundred people. The purpose of this was to confuse the five-star army outside. When the five-star army was at their wits' end, more people would have a chance to escape. This included himself. In order not to attract attention, Luo Baiquan only left 50 bodyguards behind after he finished distributing the other groups. With such a small group charging out, they naturally wouldn't be a big target and wouldn't attract the attention of the five-star army. As expected, when Luo Baiquan's team followed behind the other teams, they didn't attract the attention of the 103rd Division. They thought that it was just a small group of enemies. After a series of arrows, Luo Baiquan finally managed to escape, leaving behind 20 or so bodyguard corpses. Chapter 13:15. After interrogating the captives, he found out that the big fish was released. Commander Qin Feng blamed himself very much. This battle showed him that Baiming's elite Liaodong cavalry was completely different from his previous opponents. In the past, he dealt with some bandits and some anti-Yang CF forces without a strict organization. Compared with Baiming's highly disciplined Liaodong cavalry, he was too far behind. Qin Feng put away his carelessness and took the initiative to apologize to Commander Tiger's man. Afterwards, he was given a warning, which made him more alert and finally became a famous general. Luo Baiquan was lucky and finally escaped, but the others were not so lucky. After the battle, only less than 1,000 cavalry returned to Tulu City through various means. When they went out, there were 10,000, but when they came back, there were only 1,000. In comparison, the loss was far more than the 5-star army, and they were elites. In order to cultivate this elite cavalry, Baiming spent a lot of manpower, material, and financial resources. Every loss would make Fong Dingshan's heart ache. This time, they lost so much that he really wanted to cry. After Wu Qingho heard the news, he first comforted Fong Dingshan, saying that these lost soldiers could be re-recruited and retrained, and that there was no need to be too sad. After that, he suggested that the Liaodong cavalry should be prepared for battle. After all, he did not know whether this would anger Bugnam of Gojoseon, and whether it would lead to a war between the 5-star army and the Baiming army. Commander Tiger's man did not dare to make the decision whether to attack Tulu City or not. He sent a telegram to Yang Qindong and reported the matter in detail. After Yang Qindong, who was in Ili County, learned of the situation, he gave the order for everything to proceed as usual. This time, although the Baiming army provoked them first, they suffered the biggest loss. He believed that with this lesson, they would not act recklessly again. As for not falling out with Baiming, Yang Qindong naturally had his own plans. Yang Qindong could attack other foreign races, forces, or countries without hesitation, and he would not hesitate to move forward with the blood and corpses of his enemies. But for the great Ming dynasty, which was full of Han people, he would never do that. His goal was the strength of the Han people, and to reach the peak with them. If he killed a Han person, wouldn't that be the opposite of his goal? The matter was temporarily put aside. After this matter came out, Shi Hung and Fong Dingshan became a lot more honest. Although they did not know why the 5-star army did not retaliate, they did not dare to try. If they really attracted the 5-star army, they did not have much confidence that they could stop them. But now, they were already satisfied that both sides were not interfering with each other. Outside Gonglu City, battle cries shook the heavens, and countless people wielding swords and blades were attacking the city walls. The soldiers wearing the Ili Bianli uniform were constantly shooting arrows or holding swords and spears to defend the city. Not far away from the city, the 5-star army's cavalrymen were lined up in neat rows. The flag of the 5-star army was fluttering high in the air. The commander of the first army of the non-human kind, Bai Shuang, was riding on a war horse, silently watching everything that was happening in front of him. Ever since they had crossed the heavenly mountains and entered the Little Yule City, the first army led by Bai Shuang had appeared invincible. The quick-witted white Shuang adopted the method of sending out a small team when encountering a small group of enemies, and sending out the entire army when encountering a large group of enemies. This allowed the soldiers under him to gain experience on the battlefield. Although there were some losses because of this, the effect was very good. The soldiers had all experienced the cruelty of the battlefield and had all seen blood. There were no new recruits in the army, and they were all veterans. While training the soldiers, Bai Shuang did not forget to strengthen himself. This time, only his first army came to Ili Bianli, and in the end, there were only 30,000 of them. With just these people, they wanted to overturn Ili Bianli, who had hundreds of thousands of soldiers and was the host. He did not have such arrogance. How to strengthen himself? After thinking about it, Bai Shuang had his own idea and reported this idea to Yang Qindong through the radio and obtained his approval. After obtaining permission, Bai Shuang started to put it into action, and under his hard work, the villages outside the important towns and cities were surrounded one by one. Some of the rich people in the villages became ghosts under the blades of the first army. After killing those who obstructed them, they opened the granaries, and the local people were finally able to fill their stomachs. At this moment, when the 5-star army expressed their intention to recruit them and said that as long as they followed them, once they took down the important towns, they would be able to obtain more food. More and more young people joined the 5-star army, and the army swelled up. Since ancient times, the people were the kindest and the easiest to be satisfied. This was not only the case for the Han people, but for the other races as well. Their request was very simple, and that was to be able to eat their fill and not starve to death. However, this small request could not be satisfied. The gap between the rich and the poor existed everywhere, but the emperors only saw the prosperity of the capital and the big cities. As for the lives of the people in the corners, they did not know, and no one would tell them. However, it was undeniable that these people were a force that could not be ignored, and they were often the first to rebel. Under Yang Hodong's guidance, Bai Shuang, who understood this principle, chose to pull these people under his command. He borrowed their strength to complete the strategy of using the spear to attack the shield. From the looks of it, everything was going smoothly. Currently, Bai Shuang had 30,000 soldiers of the First Army under him and 80,000 people under him. However, these 80,000 people were not the limit. Every day, thousands of people were joining at a rate of increasing. The more people there were, the more rations they would need. Thus, Bai Shuang gave up on the idea of attacking the small villages and set his sights on the important cities. Gonglu City was the main road from the capital to Telahara, and it was heavily guarded. Of course, there was also a large amount of rations stored there. 110,000 people, under Bai Shuang's orders, surrounded Gonglu City, and what followed was a brutal siege. This battle would focus on the civilians. When Bai Shuang promised that once they took down the city, they would take 70% of the wealth and rations, while the five-star army would only take 30%, the civilians became excited and agitated. Even without Bai Shuang's supervision, they had already made their own siege ladders. Holding the various weapons they had obtained before, including sabers, swords, spears, staffs, and even hoes and pickaxes, they launched an extremely fierce attack on Gonglu City. Within Gonglu City, there were 20,000 soldiers of the First Army. With such an advantage in numbers, if the First Army of the non-human kind only had 30,000 soldiers, it would be almost impossible to take them down with cold weapons. However, with these 80,000 soldiers, it was a completely different story. They were fighting for survival, and they were truly fearless. After one wave died, another wave charged up, and it seemed like they would not stop until they took down the city. After 5 days of continuous siege, only half of the 20,000 soldiers in the city remained alive. Moreover, the morale of the soldiers was very low. Seeing that the city was about to fall, the general had no choice but to send out the 6th carrier pigeon to ask for help. At this time, within the palace of the First Army, King Bao Lide was sitting on his throne with a worried expression. His gaze fell on Prime Minister Arab, General Waliji, Korban, and the others in the hall, as if he was asking for advice. The sudden appearance of the First Army had completely caught the First Army off guard. When King Bao Lide and Prime Minister Arab had analyzed the situation, they had not thought of this at all. They believed that while the 5-star army was powerful, their lack of manpower was a fatal flaw. It was impossible for them to pose any threat to the First Army. With Heavenly Mountain, even if the 5-star army came, they would not be able to send too many people. After all, once there were too many people, food would become a huge hindrance. They had come with the intention of watching from the sidelines, and they had even thought about how many reinforcements they should send to help the Turpan Kingdom. After all, they knew that if the lips were gone, the teeth would be cold. Who would have thought that the 5-star army would appear right in front of them, and no one could stop them? They had arrived at Gonglu City just like that. Gonglu City was only a little over 200 li away from Ili City. Once the place was breached, Ili City would be in grave danger. It could be said that their foundation had been shaken. Under King Bao Lide's gaze, Arab finally spoke. "We have to save them, but the problem is how to save them, and how many soldiers to send out." This meant that Arab was also hesitant. How many people should they send to save them? Should they send their main force to fight the 5-star army? Or should they send out a small number of soldiers to save Gonglu City from being surrounded? The reason why Arab was so troubled was because the people attacking the city were the citizens of the First Army. Even if they killed them, it would not do any harm to the 5-star army. On the contrary, they would have to bear the bad reputation of killing the citizens. This was not what the Prime Minister wanted. On this point, Bao Lide was also in a difficult position, and he was also very angry. He believed that he had been very compassionate towards the people ever since he took the throne, and his cooperation with the Prime Minister Alipu was also considered tacit. The strength of the entire Ili Empire was constantly rising. Otherwise, he wouldn't have the idea of expanding his territory. But why would the citizens rebel? This was simply incomprehensible. On this point, King Bao Lide had also committed a bureaucratic crime, and even Prime Minister Arab had become an accomplice to the villain. They could only see the prosperity in front of them, but they could not imagine the hardships of the people in the remote areas under their rule. Of course, with their status, it was difficult for them to investigate the hardships of the people. With a large number of people following them, how could they have the opportunity to do so? On this point, it had to be said that Yang Qindong had done very well. Chapter 13:16. With Yang Bao as a powerful tool, countless reporters went around and reported everything they saw and heard to the local Yang Bao. The situation could be seen at a glance. Once the reporters found out that there was a bug in their reports, they would receive a large reward. This greatly motivated the reporters. For example, the Yang Bao of the various regions had become something that important officials like City Lord Yu Qian had to read every day. Even Yang Qindong would read the different Yang Bao when he was free to understand the situation under his rule. In an era without the internet, it was naturally impossible to spread the news all over the world. However, with Yang Bao, the situation was greatly alleviated. In particular, Yang Qindong strongly encouraged the reporters to report more shady things and gave them a large reward. This kind of thing that was usually seen as shameful by the monarch and even covered up was actually encouraged by Yang Qindong. It was easy to imagine that in front of these reporters, they would pick on some things for no reason. Which official would dare to mess around with their superiors? Yang Bao's appearance also became a spur to the officials of the various regions. Once they understood where the problem was, they would solve it as quickly as possible. They were afraid that this matter would be reported and affect their own political achievements. In addition, Yang Xie's law was based on a proportional distribution of grain. If the harvest was good, more grain would be handed in. If the harvest was bad, less grain would be handed in. And if the harvest was bad, children could still receive grain. In this way, they did not have to worry about not having enough to eat in a year of famine or having a hand in a large amount of grain when the harvest was good and the people became richer. At the very least, food and clothing were no longer a problem. The commoners would be able to eat their fill, and they would have extra money to buy the things they liked. Under such living conditions, who would think of rebelling? If someone dared to think of rebelling, they would not be able to get past the people. Different policies led to different people's hearts. Compared to Yang Xie, there were too many loopholes. No matter how hard Bao lied and a lip worked, no matter how good their policies were, when it came to the implementation of the policies, it was completely different. The people still did not have real benefits. Without food to eat, what could they do if they did not rebel? But no matter what, they were still citizens under their rule. If they really fell out with them, they would only lose their own strength. This was what gave Bao Lide and Alip a headache. The people were their roots, but now they had become their enemy. At this moment, the two of them regretted it. If they had known this would happen, they would have been nicer to the commoners, or at least moved them into the city. This was all their fault for underestimating the power of the common people. They thought that these people were just a pile of loose sand and wouldn't be able to do much. We have to save them, and we have to kill the civilians as well. After hesitating for a long time, King Bao Lide finally made up his mind. Hearing this decision, Prime Minister Alipu's body trembled. He knew that the worst result was coming. It was hard to imagine what would happen if all the civilians were killed. Even if they won the war, there would be no civilians in the future. How could they talk about the country's development? But at this moment, he really couldn't stop it, because he knew that based on the current situation, this decision was undoubtedly the correct one. Now that he had made up his mind, things were much easier. Next, he ordered Wu Liji to lead the 80,000 cavalrymen out of the city to rescue Gonglu County. If the commoners didn't retreat, they were to kill them. Wu Liji obeyed the order and left. It was only a distance of 200 li, and for the cavalrymen, it would only take them half a day. As soon as their vanguard army left the inner city, the scouts of the first army of the non-human kind discovered them and quickly sent the news back. Military commander? 80,000 cavalrymen. I'm afraid we won't be able to defeat them. In the temporary military tent, the 301st Regiment's commander, Tu Hai, said with a face full of worry. During this period of time, Bai Shuang had used his own methods to convince Tu Hai and the others, allowing them to fully realize that other than being a little younger, this commander in front of them was indeed outstanding in terms of personal ability. If they had to compare, he was much stronger than Commander Su Kuda. Not only Tu Hai, but the other 3 division commanders also looked at Bai Shuang. They wanted to see how this military commander would deal with this situation. That's right, we won't be able to defeat them, Bai Shuang said with a relaxed face, not blushing in the slightest. He only had 30,000 men, while the enemy had 80,000 cavalrymen. Furthermore, they were fighting on their home ground. Whether it was the logistics or the replenishment of their troops, they were not something he could compare to. Since that was the case, there was no way he could continue fighting this battle. If we can't win, then we'll retreat. Our original plan wasn't to attack the big cities anyway. Retreat. Hearing this decision, Tu Hai and the others were stunned. Obviously, this result was out of their expectations. Of course we have to retreat. Didn't Division Commander 2 already say that? If we can't win, then what are we waiting for? Order the army to prepare to retreat. All right, take out a portion of the silver we've obtained during this period of time and distribute it to the commoners. Tell them that this is a reward for their hard work over the past few days. Bai Shuang chuckled. Retreating was the right thing to do. By making preparations in advance, they could ensure that they would not suffer any losses when the Ely army arrived. But when it came to giving out silver, the division commanders were confused. If they were going to retreat, then the commoners would naturally be abandoned as well. What was the point of giving them silver then? Seeing that the 4 division commanders were silent, it was clear that they could not understand. Bai Shuang knew that if he didn't explain, then everyone would not be able to get over it. Thus, he said, silver is just a worldly possession. We are now marching to war. Bringing so many things will only affect our speed. Since that's the case, why don't we give half of it to the commoners? This way, they will know how good we are. So, when Ely suppresses Li De Jun, what do you think they will think at that time? Oh, I understand. This is a comparison. As the invaders, we give the commoners silver. On the other hand, their army is going to slaughter the commoners. This will only cause the commoners to be even more alienated from them. It is possible that they will come looking for us. Luan Xiaojing, the commander of the 302nd Division, said with a look of sudden realization. Yes, this is a trap. Sensei Naganabu, the commander of the 303rd Division, also spoke up. It was rare for someone of a different race to have such a thorough understanding of Han culture. Bai Shuang was very satisfied with his subordinate's performance. Then he said with a smile, all right, since everyone knows the meaning behind this, let's go make the arrangements now. The first army of the foreign races took out half of the silver they had plundered and distributed it to the commoners who were attacking the city. This received a wave of praise. In comparison, their own king had abandoned them, while the enemy had sent them silver. It was clear who was better and who was worse. Amidst the praises of the commoners, Wu Liji led the 80,000 cavalry to the outskirts of Gonglu City. What followed was a massacre of the commoners. Infantry was naturally weaker than cavalry. In addition, their weapons were not as good as the enemy's, and there was no effective organization. Very quickly, the commoners were forced to retreat. Blood flowed like a river outside the city, and more than 20,000 commoner corpses were left behind. General Wu Liji was not happy at all after winning such a battle. He didn't even know if this was a good or bad thing. However, as a general, he was just following orders. With a sigh, he ordered, fortify the city, prepare arrows, kerosene, logs, and boulders in case the enemy attacks again. Just as Wu Liji was reorganizing the defenses of Gonglu City, a piece of news spread through the entire inner country. It was said that Bao Lide was an army that didn't dare to fight against the 5-star army and only dared to kill the commoners. Very soon, The commoners were in an uproar, and the foundation of the country was greatly shaken. At this time, the first army of the foreign races had already turned around and headed towards the west of Keet Meon Mountain. There was a city called Tudor Rock, and it was their next target. Since they were already prepared, the army retreated safely without suffering any losses. This made by Shuang, the new commander, even more powerful. Currently, there were very few people in the first army who didn't want to submit to this young commander. When the first army of the foreign races arrived at the vicinity of Tudor Rock City, it could be imagined that there would be another one-sided slaughter. Perhaps not long after, the commoners here would be instigated by them again, and the reputation of the five-star army as a good army would spread very quickly here. In Luobu City of the Yarkiang tribe, the new 5 armies were preparing to continue their expedition. With the example of the first army, Shi Wanshan followed suit and used the local commoners to bribe and make use of them. Moreover, they were doing very well. One of the most important reasons was that they had the help of the surrendered general, Aleifu. This was definitely a great weapon. As a general of the Yarkiang tribe, Aleifu was very familiar with the situation here. After Shi Wanshan and Ning Wenfeng had a discussion, they put Aleifu in an important position and allowed him to establish an army. With the support of the new 5 armies, a puppet army was quickly established, and its members were constantly expanding. This time, they were able to successfully take down Luobu City, and this puppet army played a very important role in it. After taking down the city, they opened the granary, and all the puppet army, including their families, were able to eat and save a lot of food. Suddenly receiving so many benefits out of nowhere, it was natural for a person's mentality to change easily, compared to working hard for many years and still having to live a poor life. Now that they could have enough to eat and wear, this also aroused the greed in the hearts of many people. The number of the puppet army increased, and in just a few days, it surpassed the number of the new 5 armies, reaching a huge number of 40,000. Chapter 13-17. Araf regained control of the military power. These were all given to him by the 5-star army. This made him very excited, and at the same time, he felt even more loyal. With his full cooperation and the people wanting to get better benefits, the new 5-star army led them all the way south and went straight to the next target, Chitai City. It could be imagined that it wouldn't take long for the entire Yarkiang tribe to fall into chaos under the suppression of the 2 armies. Perhaps at that time, the 5-star army's main force would be able to solve all the problems here. Compared to the results and victories of the First Army and the new 5-star army, Yang Shandong's main force of the 5-star army had just taken down the Iron Gate Pass and was confronting the Aries dynasty from afar. This time, the Aries dynasty was entrusted by the 3 countries to help. They sent a total of 150,000 soldiers, including 100,000 cavalry and 50,000 infantry. When Yang Shandong heard the news, he was speechless. Although the Great Ming Empire was known for its vast land and abundant resources with a large population, its financial resources were not as strong as outsiders thought. At least in the area of war horses, it was seriously lacking. Just like the 100,000 Liaodong Iron Cavalry, it was also built by Baiming at a great cost. If the Great Ming Empire had an inexhaustible supply of war horses, in addition to their powerful logistical support, wouldn't they be able to easily build an army of 1 million soldiers? If that was the case, not to mention people looking for trouble with them, it would already be extremely fortunate if those foreign races didn't come looking for trouble. Just from this point alone, it could be seen how important war horses were to a country. This time, the Aries dynasty sent 100,000 cavalry. It was said that some of the elite divisions had 2 horses per person. This number made Yang Shandong instantly jealous. Today, Yang Xie was very powerful. Whether it was territory, population, or wealth, it could definitely make any forces and countries look up to it. But in the area of war horses, it was still seriously lacking. This naturally had a lot to do with the continuous increase in the number of soldiers of the 5-star army. But didn't it mean that the foundation of the 5-star army was still too weak? Now that there were more than 100,000 war horses in front of him, It would be strange if Yang Qindong wasn't tempted. Just as he was thinking about how to deal with the Aries dynasty's army, he received a telegram from Tiger's Mane. It recorded in detail that Baiming's Liaodong Iron Cavalry had harassed the transport convoy and the immigrants. A group of villains. Beta Persei looked annoyed after reading the telegram. Yang Qindong's expression as he fell into deep thought. He had his own ideas on how to solve the problem between himself and the North and South Great Ming. Considering his goals and ideals, he first rejected the idea of heavy losses empire and Baiming himself. In the future, the Han people would become the rulers of the entire world. If the population was too small, it would not work. If the population was too small, he couldn't do something that would harm his own strength. At this moment, the Han people of Baiming Empire had long been regarded by Yang Qindong as his own people. Even if he lost a person for no reason, he would feel heartache. It was a pity that very few people would be able to understand his way of thinking. Perhaps in the eyes of many people in the Great Ming Dynasty, especially those from the imperial family and the so-called well-read people who wanted to gain benefits, he was an anomaly. He was someone who wanted to usurp the throne. How difficult would it be to make these people surrender to him without shedding a drop of blood on their swords? The revolution had not succeeded yet. Comrade, you still need to work hard. For his great ideals, Yang Qindong would not retreat even if he knew that there was a bottomless abyss in front of him. He firmly believed that as long as he did something, there was a possibility of success. And he was now on the path to success. Since you took the initiative to provoke us, you must pay the price. Send a telegram to Tiger's Mane and tell him to act like an army attacking the city and force Shi Hung to hand over the people. Tell them to hand over 1 million Han people. Otherwise, we will break through Tulu City and kill our way to Baiming's capital. Send a telegram to Yangtze and have his logistics division fully cooperate. Yang Qindong said firmly, 1 million. Hearing this request, Beta Persei took a deep breath and said worriedly, I'm afraid they won't agree to this request, right? They definitely will. Yang Qindong's lips curled into a smile. No one understood the system of the Great Ming Dynasty better than him. At this moment, the Northern Ming Dynasty was in a weakened state and was no match for the five-star army. He could see this logic clearly, and Zhu Qiyu could also see it clearly. In order to protect his position, he could only agree. In a country where military power was dominated by literature, the emperor was number 1, the important officials and clans were number 2, the other civil officials and scholars were number 3, and the generals were number 4. As for the commoners at the bottom of the hierarchy, they didn't even have a place. However, paying such a price could indeed temporarily protect his safety. Yang Qindong believed that Zhu Qiyu knew how to choose, and even if he didn't want to choose, others would help him make the choice. Yang Qindong's face was full of confidence. He wanted to use this method to nibble away at Baiming's strength. It was like boiling a frog in warm water. One day, when the other party reacted, they would realize that they had no commoners to use, no army to send, and no people to recruit. At that time, it would be time to seize the fruits of victory without shedding a drop of blood. There was another important factor that prompted Yang Qindong to make this decision. As Qiqian City continued to grow, as Yangtze's territory continued to expand, as the five-star army's military strength increased, the Han people that he could use were insufficient. Just like in some of the secret factories in Qiqian City, as electricity was popularized and used, production lines were built one after another with the help of the technological books he took out. New factories also sprouted up like bamboo shoots after a rain, and all of them began to lack manpower. This forced Yang Qindong to think of other ways. In his opinion, it wasn't a big deal for some knowledge to be learned by the Han people. Even if he grew old one day and his descendants didn't live up to expectations, the ones who grasped this knowledge and power would definitely be the Han people. This way, even if they split and merged, in the end, the meat would still be in the pot and would not be taken advantage of by other countries. With this thought in mind, he dared to use the Han people even if they were a little stupid. Using this opportunity to bring in 1 million people it should be able to greatly alleviate the development of Qiqian City. With Yang Qindong's confident tone, Beta Persei naturally wouldn't doubt it. After agreeing, he went to the telegraph room. Yang Qindong's gaze once again landed on the sand table in front of him. After a while, his magnetic voice sounded out. Men, inform the 4th Regiment Commander Ling Daqiang to make a trip here. With a gold star on his shoulder, Ling Daqiang quickly appeared in front of Yang Qindong. As the Coal Vanguard Division, Yang Qindong favored him the most and invested the most in Firearms Division. At the beginning of the year, all of them were promoted from Senior Colonel to Major General. This also represented the promotion of their status and importance in the military. 6th Young Master, Ling Daqiang, is here to report. Ling Daqiang gave a standard military salute and stood on the spot with his chest puffed out. Very good. Yang Qindong, who was born in the military, looked at Ling Daqiang with satisfaction, then waved his hand and the two of them came to the sand table. Yang Qindong pointed at the Changdo slope in front of the Iron Gate and said, "See here, a total of 150,000 Aries Dynasty troops, 100,000 cavalry, and 50,000 infantry. How about it? Do you have the confidence to give them a good fight?" Division Commander Ling Daqiang only had a little more than 8,000 people. It was impossible for Ling Daqiang to not be afraid of dealing with an army of 150,000 people. But since it was Yang Qindong's request, Ling Daqiang didn't hesitate and said, "6th Young Master, please give the order. I promise to complete the mission." Very good. What Yang Qindong wanted was this undiscounted attitude. Of course, he also knew that it was impossible to make all the enemies stay, so he just said to give the enemy a good fight. As for how to do it, he already had a plan in mind. Division Commander Ling, let the troops prepare. In 2 days, the individual rocket launchers and 20,000 grenades will be sent by the logistics department. After that, the armed forces will be ready to launch an attack in 3 days. Any questions? This was where Yang Qindong's confidence came from. After years of hard work, the rocket launcher lathe was finally successfully developed and started operating before the end of the year. Although it was far from being comparable to the ones in the future, one lathe could already produce 200 shells a day. With a total of 2 lathes, it was equivalent to producing 400 shells a day. This time, they had transported 5,000 shells at once, which was enough to deal with the current situation. As for the wooden grenades, they didn't require much technology. As long as the ratio of gunpowder was right, it was easy to install. This time, 20,000 pills were shipped over as well. They would continue to appear in an endless stream to ensure that the 5-star army would be able to provide powerful firepower support. This was the experience that Yang Qindong summarized from the Battle of Botiangang. Facing a small group of cavalry, the use of firearms was very limited. It wasn't impossible to use them, but it was too wasteful and not worth it. But facing the enemy's army, there wasn't much of a problem. Yang Qindong had already decided that in the future, whenever he encountered a large number of enemies, he would use firearms. This way, not only would he be able to seize territory faster, he would also be able to reduce his casualties. Compared to the cost of weapon materials, he would be able to save a lot of money on compensation for the soldiers. So why not? Originally, Ling Daqiang didn't have much confidence, but the order was given by Yang Qindong, so even if he couldn't do it, he still had to do it. Now that he heard that there were rocket launchers and grenades as support, he was naturally full of confidence. When he faced Yang Qindong again, his voice was a bit louder as he replied, "I promise to complete the mission." Chapter 13-18. Under Yang Qindong's orders, the 4th Division was ready for battle. The other armies, divisions, and regiments also received different missions. They were just waiting for the cannon to sound and the enemy to fall into chaos. In comparison, the 150,000-strong Aries Dynasty army was still dreaming. Due to its geographical location, the Aries Dynasty's people were valiant, especially their cavalry. After all, the influence of the grassland cavalry was still there, and it was not at its weakest yet. While their military was strong, their economic strength was too weak. As nomads, other than herding, they robbed. As for production and construction, they were still in the embryonic stage. Strictly speaking, they had just gained consciousness and had not done anything yet. It was because of this that they needed to rob to get what they needed. Just like food, they had been relying on robbing to survive. Now, they could finally change their method, which was to demand. Since they had sent troops to help Ili Bali and Yirkiang previously, they had also included the Turpan kingdom. The benefits were a must. Just like how the three countries had promised that as long as the Aries dynasty sent troops, their food would not be a problem, and they would take care of it. When the Aries dynasty saw that this was a good opportunity to increase their income and wanted to get share of the pie, Turpan had already been wiped out. Ili Bali and Yirkiang had also split up their troops because of the five-star kingdom, causing them to be unable to take care of themselves. Instead, the Aries dynasty had become a scattered army that no one cared about. This result was naturally not satisfactory, especially the leading general, Dadar. Before he left, he had promised King Yuzong Hasan that he would bring back more food and other spoils of war. However, now that he had become an existence that no one cared about, he had been suppressing his anger for a long time. In the tent, Dadar angrily said to his two deputies, Nizam and Nurahan, "Send more scouts to inform the other two countries. Tell them that if they do not send more food, we will retreat. At that time, we will let the five-star army occupy this region, and they will have nothing." Yes. The two generals immediately lowered their heads and answered. When he raised his head, Ridhar's expression was much better. "How is it? What's the reaction of the five-star army?" "Yes, they have been mobilizing their troops for the past 2 days. However, due to the large number of enemy scouts, our scouts were unable to follow them too closely. We do not know where they are going, but I think they should be prepared." Nurahan reported everything he knew in detail. From his attitude, one could see that he was very professional and very careful. After talking for a while, he saw that Dirtle was only listening with his eyes squinted. Dirtle didn't express his opinion. After thinking for a while, he carefully said, "General, according to my opinion, the five-star army will make a big move this time. Should we retreat a bit and maintain enough distance between the two sides?" "Retreat? Retreat to where?" This time, before Ridhar could speak, Nizam spoke first. "The distance between the two sides is now 20 li. This is enough to act as a buffer between the two armies. Even if the enemy wants to make a move, we have enough time to make arrangements. Furthermore, I don't think the five-star army will take the initiative to attack us. This kind of mutual destruction is not something they want to see." Speaking of this, Nizam had a smug look on his face. He had seriously analyzed the strength of both sides. Although the five-star army was strong, they only had about 200,000 soldiers. Even if they added in the miscellaneous troops, they would still have less than 300,000 soldiers. Adding in the Ili tribe and Yirkiang tribe, they had a total of 500 to 600,000 soldiers. This was twice the number of the enemy. Furthermore, they had the home ground advantage. He couldn't think of any possibility of losing. Just the 150,000 soldiers on his side was already a tough bone. The enemy's five-star army was even weaker than his side. What would they use to attack? Was this a joke? Nizam was very confident, and this affected Ridhar as well. Ridhar was also very optimistic as he said, "That's right, this general thinks so too. The five-star army doesn't have the appetite to eat us. They're just bluffing. There's no need to pay attention to them. Just let them do what they want." Seeing that the two generals didn't care, Nuerahan was a little worried and wanted to say something, but the 100,000 Kazakh soldiers were wiped out by the five-star army. "We can't just let them..." Enough. Seeing that Nuerahan was still talking, Ridhar's face darkened. "That's because they underestimated us. Botion Mound's terrain isn't suitable for an army to spread out. Our Changdo slope is completely different. Our terrain here is wide, and there are many high slopes around us. As long as we form a triangle formation, they won't be able to take advantage of us." In this battle, Derdar's confidence was largely due to the terrain they were in. Changdo slope was 30 li long and a few dozen li wide. There were many high slopes around it, and they were all occupied by their army. It could be said that as long as the five-star army dared to attack here, they would be able to take the lead. If the cavalry on the ground cooperated with them, they might not be able to return alive, but they would definitely be able to heavily injure them. Yes, New Arahan still wanted to say something, but after being reprimanded by Ridhar, he shut his mouth. Although he felt that there was no problem with his arrangements, he didn't know why, but he was very anxious. He felt like something bad was going to happen. All right, all of you are dismissed. Take care of your own army. What we need to do now is to stay put and not move. We can stop the 5-star army's main force from acting rashly. This will be a great merit. Whether it is Ili or Yi Erqiang, they will have to obediently send us rations and satisfy our demands. Ridhar said with a cold smile. He had a plan in his mind. Unless there was no other choice, he wouldn't make an enemy out of the 5-star army. He would just wait here and continue to collect rations from the two countries. He would then send them back to his own country to solve the problem of food for the Aries dynasty. Without spending a single soldier, he would be able to reap so many benefits. No matter how he looked at it, it was a great merit. As for whether the 5-star army would really attack, he wasn't afraid. With 150,000 soldiers, if the 5-star army really wanted to attack, he wouldn't mind showing them his power. He would let them know that the 5-star army wasn't invincible in this place. 2 days had passed. Hundreds of carriages and mules appeared in the main camp under the protection of the 2nd Legion. In order to ensure the safety of these cannons and grenades, the 2nd Legion's commander Neo Duo personally escorted them, along with the 305th and 306th regiments. With such a formation, even if they met with a surprise attack, they would still have the ability to retaliate. After the goods were handed over, the cannons and grenades, as well as 50 individual rocket launchers, were sent to the 4th Regiment's commander. Neo Duo then went to the main camp and reported to Yang Chendong. The report was true, but so was the attack mission. As soon as Neo Duo entered the camp, he sensed the aura of a great battle. Bai Shuangjing, who was also a commander of the alien army, led the first army of the alien race to cause a ruckus, as if Sun Wukong had entered Princess Iron Fan's stomach. Neo Duo's 2nd army could only be responsible for the protection of logistics. The huge difference made him feel very unfair. Bai Shuang was Yang Chendong's student. This was something that Neo Duo could not compare to. Therefore, he usually endured it and did not say anything. But this time, since he had caught up, he would not sit at the side and be a spectator no matter what. He also wanted to attack. He wanted to obtain military merits for the 2nd Legion. In the main tent, Neo Duo, who still had the rank of senior colonel, walked in after asking for instructions. Yang Chendong was sitting on a chair, drinking tea and reading the new issue of the Yang Report in the First City. He looked very leisurely. This made Neo Duo happy. Yang Chendong was in a good mood. This was a good sign. He quickly took 2 steps forward and came in front of Yang Chendong. He gave a standard military salute and said, "Reporting to the 6th Young Master, Neo Duo of the 2nd Legion is here to report on his work. Please give your instructions." As soon as Neo Duo entered the tent, Yang Chendong saw him. He did not greet him because he thought that there was no need. This commander was personally appointed by him, which was enough to prove that he thought highly of this person. Since he was one of his own people, why was there a need to be polite? Seeing that Neo Duo was standing there so upright, Yang Chendong put down the newspaper in his hand and said with a smile, "Commander Neo, come and sit." "Thank you, 6th Young Master, for giving me a seat." Neo Duo replied mechanically. Then, he carefully went to the stool beside Yang Chendong and sat down. Even if he sat down, it might not be as comfortable as standing. He could only lean his butt against the stool and look like he would stand up at any time. It looked a little tiring. After noticing Neo Duo's uncomfortable sitting posture, the corners of Yang Chendong's mouth curled up slightly, revealing a smile. "All right, there are no outsiders here. Make yourself at home." As he spoke, he pushed the fruit plate in front of him forward. On the fruit plate, there were paper-wrapped candies, peanuts, melon seeds, and cigarettes. It was quite sumptuous. Neo Duo opened his mouth and revealed a somewhat unnatural smile. Then, he carefully took the Bugnam of Gojosian brand cigarettes and handed one to Yang Chendong. He also took one for himself. Yang Chendong conveniently took the cigarette. Neo Duo had already lit the match and had a look of regret on his face. All of these were created by Yang Qindong. They were all amazing inventions. Anyone who saw them would be shocked. Chapter 1319. With the help of Neo Duo's lit match, Yang Qindong lit his cigarette and took a light puff. He said casually, "How was it? Did the journey go smoothly?" Reporting to the sixth young master, it went very smoothly. Knowing the importance of this batch of supplies, our outsiders' second army sent 2 divisions to escort them. No one was blind enough to have any ideas about them. When it came to serious matters, Neo Duo straightened his body again. "Good, be at ease, be at ease." Yang Qindong nodded. "Did you know that Baiming attacked the logistics team?" "Yes, I heard. They are really bold." Sixth young master, this subordinate request for battle. Please allow our outsiders' second army to attack Tulu City and teach the Baiming army a lesson. Neo Duo's face was full of anger when he spoke about this matter. He only hated the fact that the other party didn't attack him. Otherwise, he would definitely teach them a lesson. Not for the time being. Yang Qindong's expression was also somewhat angry. "I have already sent a telegram to Tiger's Mane and told him to negotiate with Baiming. If they don't compensate, then beat them up. Yes, if they don't listen, then beat them until they listen." Neo Duo also said in agreement. He was also born in the Great Ming Dynasty and was previously a centurion in the Great Ming Dynasty's army. However, when it came to Baiming, he didn't hesitate at all. From this, it could be seen that he was now completely integrated into the 5-star army. In the 5-star army, the respect given to generals and soldiers was definitely not something the Great Ming Dynasty could compare to. In the Great Ming Dynasty, where the emperor and the scholar officials ruled the world together, using literature to suppress military force was the mainstream. Martial artists were also seen as brute men who only knew how to be brave and had no social status at all. Unlike in Yangtze, whether it was a general or a soldier, everyone was respected. As long as you had the ability, you would be given a platform to display your skills. There would not be any unfair treatment. This was also the reason why Yangtze was able to attract so many talents to come here. Neo Duo's face turned red at the thought of a platform for his performance. He stammered, "Sixth young master, is it going to be a big battle?" Logically speaking, this question was a bit abrupt. This was already a military secret. If Yang Qindong was not willing to talk about it, no one could pry into it. However, Neo Duo was the commander of an army after all. He was also someone that Yang Qindong trusted and thought highly of. Moreover, this was a private occasion, so it was not a nuisance to ask. "Yes, we are going to attack the Aries Dynasty's army." Yang Qindong did not intend to hide it. After all, the military action plan had been made long ago. Some cavalry troops had already begun to move to the planned position yesterday. There was no harm in telling Neo Duo now. Sure enough, they were going to attack. Neo Duo immediately became excited. He reached out to put out the cigarette and asked eagerly, "Sixth young master, do we have any mission for the second army of the foreign race?" Yang Qindong only knew Neo Duo's intention at this time. He could not help but laugh out loud. When Yang Qindong laughed, Neo Duo became a little nervous. He was afraid that his request would be rejected, so he hurriedly said, "Sixth young master, our second army has 2 main divisions this time. We can also share the attack mission. Besides, Commander Bai and the others have been performing meritorious deeds. Commander Bai referred to Bai Shuang, the commander of the first army of the foreign race. Neo Duo mentioned him and asked Yang Qindong to give them a chance. They couldn't always watch others eat meat, while they couldn't even drink soup. Originally, Yang Qindong did not have the intention to attack the second army of the foreign race. It was also because they were not present when the plan was made. But now that the weapons had arrived, and there were 2 main divisions with more than 10,000 people, it would be a waste if he did not use them. Besides, Bai Shuang had been performing meritorious deeds. It was not good to let Neo Duo and the others watch from aside. It was not good for the morale of the army. Considering these reasons, Yang Qindong finally nodded and said, "Okay, follow me to the sand table to take a look." This meant that he agreed. Duo was overjoyed. He hurriedly got up and followed Yang Chendong to the sand table. The weather in June on the grassland had a thin layer of mist in the morning, indicating that the weather would be good today. The five-star army had breakfast at 5 a.m. At 5:30 a.m., the various armies began to move. Under the protection of the Liaodong Cavalry Division, Light Cavalry Regiment, and Reconnaissance Regiment, the 4th Infantry Division moved out and rushed towards the Aries dynasty's camp 20 miles ahead. This movement was noticed by the scouts and immediately reported back to the army. This shocked Lidar, who had just woken up and was still thinking about where to go for a stroll. Nizam and Noerahan, who received the news, rushed to the main tent. At this moment, Lidar was already sitting on a large chair. His calm face did not reveal what he was thinking. "General, the five-star army has moved. They are rushing towards us." Noerahan reported softly. "I know. What are you panicking for? This is just the five-star army's probing. I have already notified the entire army to be on alert." In this short period of time, Lidar had calmed down a lot. Although the five-star army's actions were indeed a little out of his expectations, he didn't panic at all when he thought about how he had made sufficient preparations beforehand. After comforting himself, he sent his General Noerahan to the front line and another General Noerahan to contact the armies on the nearby mountains to get them to prepare for battle. Noerahan received the order and went to the front line. A total of 10,000 infantry and 10,000 cavalry came out in battle armor. The Aries dynasty's army was not wealthy. The so-called armor was nothing more than a black-gray leather waistcoat, which did not provide much protection. However, the 20,000 people were still in formation, giving off a feeling of elite soldiers. Noerahan climbed up a wooden tower that was 10 meters tall and personally stood on the platform. He held a red and yellow flag in his hands. This was a command flag. It could be used as a clairvoyant to command the armies on the nearby mountains to cooperate with the army. Everything was ready and waiting for the enemy to appear. From his position, he could see everything that was happening on the battlefield. It was also because of this that he saw a scene that would shock him for the rest of his life, and he would never forget it. At 8 a.m., the five-star army appeared 3 miles away from the Aries dynasty's army in a cloud of dust, as if they were looking for a giant. One of the neat army made up of army green was moving forward step by step. Prepare for battle. Noerahan saw that the five-star army was about to enter the cavalry's attack range. He raised his sword and shouted loudly. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, the five-star army cavalry came to a halt one after another. It was like a high-speed car suddenly stopped on the highway. It was so neat. Just this action alone made Noerahan's heart sink unconsciously. It was said that military orders were like mountains. Often a small action could be used to see the discipline and fighting strength of an army. And from the cavalry that suddenly stopped, Noerahan had to admit that at least in the area of executing orders, the five-star army's execution ability had surpassed the Aries army. After receiving the order, the Aries army would also act according to the order, but they would definitely not be as swift and unified as the five-star army. It felt as if there was a bottomless abyss in front of them, and the army was standing on the edge of the cliff. While Noerahan was sighing, the army green mixed in with the five-star army was still moving forward. It was like a giant beast sticking out its tongue and continuously moving forward. The military uniforms of the five-star armies were not completely uniform, especially for the cavalry. Considering that they often had to face the enemy's arrow attacks when charging, it was very difficult to protect them just by wearing the green military uniform. Yang Chendong allowed the cavalry to not wear the green uniforms and could wear armor to protect themselves. But there was a clear requirement that the armor had to be mainly black in color. This way, it would have the effect of shocking and intimidating the enemy. Therefore, as infantry, the Lung 4th Division was especially eye-catching with their green uniforms mixed in with their black armor. When the soldiers of the Lung Vanguard moved forward in an orderly manner and silently moved forward, it would often give people the feeling of a sharp sword being unsheathed and slashing forward. These are infantry. General Nizam was riding on a tall horse. He looked at the army of soldiers approaching slowly with a puzzled look on his face. If the five-star army really wanted to attack, shouldn't they send out cavalry? Only cavalry could borrow the momentum of the horse to launch a charge and achieve the greatest effect of breaking the enemy. This was the advantage of cavalry. The man borrowed the momentum of the horse, and the blade borrowed the momentum of the wind. Only in this way could they be invincible. But what was the meaning of sending out infantry? Was it really just a probing move? Nizam's heart was filled with doubts. This was the first time he saw such a tactic, and he couldn't understand it. He raised his head to look at the high platform and wanted to see what Nurahan would say. At this moment, Nurahan also had a confused expression. How could this not be the first time he saw such a tactic? Usually, when two armies fought, no matter which side had cavalry, they would immediately launch an attack to ensure that the cavalry had the greatest advantage. Only those who were weak and didn't have cavalry would be forced to send out infantry to fight the cavalry. Usually, doing so would require them to pay a huge price. This was the most simple logic. It was like 1 + 1 = 2. Nurahan didn't believe that the five-star army didn't understand this. If this was the case, they wouldn't have destroyed the Turpan kingdom. They wouldn't be invincible here. The more he understood this logic, the more confused he was about the five-star army's cavalry stopping and the infantry advancing. Nurahan decided to wait. Firstly, he wanted to see what tricks the five-star army was going to play. Secondly, he wanted to wait until they were at the most suitable distance to inform the cavalry to attack. Then, they would charge into the infantry and obtain victory first. Chapter 1320. Nizam decided to wait and see, as Nurahan did not give any orders. He did not necessarily have to listen to this person, but since he had no ideas, he hoped to learn from the other person's opinion. As expected, the Ares army did not make any moves. Ling Daqiang, the commander of the 4th Division, had a flash of joy in his eyes. At this moment, he remembered what Yang Chendong said to him last night. The army should move forward boldly. This is our first battle with the Ares army. They will not act rashly before they understand our intentions. At that time, Ling Daqiang, who believed these words without a doubt, made a promise on the spot. The cold warriors were not afraid of any enemy and could complete the task of quickly suppressing the enemy. At that time, his attitude was firm, but when he really came to the battlefield, it was impossible to say that Ling Daqiang's heart did not beat like a drum. After all, this was a battlefield, especially one with tens of thousands of people. Only his army was constantly moving forward while the others were still looking at him. The kind of nervousness could not be described with words. Dachang was even prepared to deal with the enemy as soon as they launched an attack. But now, it seemed that Yang Chendong was far-sighted and predicted the enemy like a god. The enemy did not make any moves. This made his confidence soar, and his steps forward became even more firm. 2 li, 1.5 li, 1 li. Finally, when they were 1 li away from the Ares army, Ling Daqiang's loud voice rang out. Halt! Prepare for battle. 1 li was the limit of the cavalry's charge. If they were any closer, the cavalry would not be able to use their charging advantage. In other words, if they were to move forward, it would be equivalent to provoking the Ares army and forcing them to charge immediately. The same distance of 1 li was also the result of Yang Chendong's estimation. At this distance, as long as the 4th Division was prepared for battle, regardless of whether it was cavalry or infantry, they would be turned into ashes and die before they could even achieve victory. The Green Army was getting closer and closer. Nizam's right hand was already raised high, and he was ready to give the order to charge. But at this moment, the other party suddenly stopped moving. This made him unsure whether he should lower his right hand or retract it. Machine gunners, get ready. Rocket launchers, ready to fire. Remember to hold the grenade for 3 breaths before throwing it. Sharpshooter, make sure the enemy doesn't get within 30 meters of us. Ling Daqiang's voice rang out one after another. All of the Cold Vanguard warriors took their positions, each carrying out their duties. Their eyes were fixed on the enemy 500 meters away from them. This wasn't the first time such an order had been given. and it was unknown how many times they had practiced this kind of training. But seriously speaking, this was the first time he had fought in such a way on the battlefield. It was finally time for a real battle. Even the well-trained soldiers of the Cold Vanguard were nervous. Their hands were sweating, and their foreheads were sweating. Some of them could even feel their arms trembling. After all, a drill was a drill. No matter how realistic it was, everyone would still think that it was fake from the bottom of their hearts. It was inevitable that they would let their guard down. However, actual combat was completely different. The slightest carelessness could lead to an irreversible situation. Every warrior did not wish to have any problems or mistakes. The more he was like this, the more nervous he was. The more nervous he was, the easier it was for him to make mistakes. The tension in the army quickly spread. As the commander, Ling Daqiang naturally felt it. He knew that he had to do something at this moment. "Men, bring me the gun." A JS-12, 7mm sniper rifle that had been polished until it was shiny was handed over to him. Ling Daqiang, who stood at the very front and was like a stabilizing force, sucked in a deep breath. Then, he raised his gun and aimed at the enemy flag bearer 500 meters away. He originally thought that the enemy would charge after he stopped moving. However, it seemed that the enemy was frightened, or perhaps they wanted to see him continue his performance. Ling Daqiang had no choice but to take the initiative. He wanted to fire the first shot. He wanted to use the sound of the gunshot to dispel the nervousness of the Cold Vanguard warriors. He wanted to use the gun to announce that the Cold Vanguard warriors would always be the strongest elite of the 5-star army. Following the fourth master Lu's sudden stop, the earth seemed to have stopped moving. The 5-star army did not move. They were waiting for Ling Daqiang's shot to start the battle. The Ares army did not move. They wanted to continue watching what the 5-star army was going to do. At a distance of 1 li, they were confident that a cavalry charge would be able to wipe out the thousands of infantrymen of the 5-star army. The wind also seemed to have stopped at this moment. It seemed to have sensed something, or perhaps it was anticipating something. The only one who moved was Ling Daqiang. He raised his gun and controlled the speed of his heartbeat to gradually maintain a stable state. Then, he took a deep breath, exhaled, and breathed again. When his body had adjusted to the calmest state, his right index finger slowly approached the trigger and moved it bit by bit. When he touched the trigger lightly and reached the state of being one with the world, the gunshot rang out. Bang! The bullet flew out of the barrel and pierced through the air. It was like an arrow leaving the bow as it shot towards the Ares army's flag bearer. The 12. 7mm sniper rifle, known as the best sniper rifle in Asia in the future, could penetrate 15mm thick alloy steel plates at a distance of 1,000 meters. After a slight tremble, the flag bearer on the opposite side reacted accordingly. The warhorse trembled violently for a moment before its body swayed and fell with a plop. Good. With a single shot, the flag bearer's head exploded from 500 meters away. This shot caused the Cold Vanguard soldiers standing behind him to cheer loudly. Good gun. Ling Daqiang was also secretly happy. This 7mm sniper rifle was taken from Yang Chendong yesterday afternoon. The current Crimson City's arsenal was far from being able to produce such a sharp gun. Naturally, this was taken from the warehouse by Yang Chendong. He also took out 100 sniper bullets and gave them to Ling Daqiang. Yesterday afternoon, Ling Daqiang fired 50 shots and finally familiarized himself with the gun's functions. Now that it was used, he was amazed. Killing someone 500 meters away was as easy as taking something out of his pocket. Compared to the 95 style, which had a maximum killing range of 400 meters, it was naturally much better. What a pity this gun will have to be returned after today's battle. Ling Daqiang thought it was a pity. Then, he focused on aiming at the next target. It was an Ares cavalry soldier who was wearing armor and was obviously not a leader. After a loud explosion, the flag bearer died. This scene shocked all the soldiers of the Ares army. In their eyes, the strongest weapon in the world was a strong bow. A good bow with great strength could take a person's life from 150 meters away. This person was a godly archer. Even in the Aries dynasty, there were only a few people who could do this. But what did they just see? A distance of 500 meters had been directly killed by the other party. There was no hesitation at all. This scene was completely beyond everyone's understanding. This was something that was impossible and impossible to accomplish. Now, it was clearly displayed in front of everyone's eyes. If they did not see it with their own eyes, no one would dare to believe it was real. Bang! Another gunshot rang out, and another centurion was shot dead. However, this shot was slightly off. It hit the shoulder, but it still shattered the shoulder blade. The centurion fell from a horse and was about to die from excessive blood loss. Bang, bang, bang. Dechang gradually got used to the 12.7mm sniper rifle's performance and also liked this method of killing. He kept pulling the trigger, and one after another fell from the horse, becoming a ghost under the gun. In the short span of a dozen breaths, a flag bearer, 5 centurions, and a chiliarch had been killed on their horses. This also allowed Nizam, who was leading the team, to regain his senses. He immediately shouted, "Charge! Cavalry charge in front! Infantry follow behind! Kill all the enemies!" They had no choice but to charge. Who knew if they would be the next to die if this continued? Nizam's shout was an order. The cavalry of the Aries dynasty, who were still silent under the gunfire, quickly responded. One after another, the cavalry began to gallop and rush towards Nizam. Hugh, Dechang finally put down the 12.7mm sniper rifle in his hand. Dechang's face was filled with excitement. He turned around and looked at 1st Regiment leader Gao Xiang, 2nd Regiment leader He Wan, and 3rd Regiment leader Lu Zhang. Follow the plan. Yes. The 3 regimental leaders quickly saluted and ran to their respective command posts. A distance of 500 meters could be covered in less than a minute for the cavalry. This was the time when the 4th Regiment was preparing. Gunners, fire. After the 1st Regiment commander gave the order, concentrated gunshots started to ring out. It was as if a whirlwind had blown past and swept forward. Dozens of light machine guns and several heavy machine guns all opened fire. It was like hundreds of firecrackers were lit. The sound quickly rang out. In exchange, the charging cavalry fell one after another. The Aries dynasty cavalry were either shot or their horses were shot. However, no matter what method, the result would not change. One after another, the cavalry was killed on their horses. One after another, the cavalry fell on the charging path. Under the inertia, there were still more Aries dynasty cavalry attacking. At this time, it was no longer a question of whether they wanted to charge or not. They simply could not stop. Rocket launchers ready, fire. Grenades ready, throw. Chapter 13:21. The commander of the 2nd Regiment, He Wan, shouted loudly. The rocket soldiers and grenade launchers under him launched their own attacks. For a moment, thunderous sounds resounded on the battlefield. Amidst the explosions, groups of Aries cavalrymen were blasted far away or torn into pieces. The battlefield was filled with smoke and the smell of flesh and blood. The commander of the 3rd Regiment was in charge of all the individual soldiers with guns. Not long after the 1st and 2nd Regiment commanders gave their orders, his voice also resounded on the battlefield. Open fire. No one is allowed to come within 20 meters of us. Attack! Dense gunshots rang out once again as thousands of soldiers opened fire in unison. Bullets filled the battlefield, forming a huge net, making it impossible for anyone to hide. There was nowhere to hide. Amidst the explosions, the Aries cavalrymen were engulfed in a sea of fire and explosions. The war horses neighed and were completely out of control. They either threw the cavalrymen on their backs to the ground or led the cavalrymen to charge into the crowd of infantrymen beside them. Countless collisions sounded. Every collision would cause one or more Aries cavalrymen to be injured or killed. Amidst the gunshots, the Aries cavalrymen's morale was also severely damaged. In order to survive, no one thought of attacking. However, even if they wanted to escape, they had no direction. They were like headless flies, running in all directions. The miserable General Nizam of the vanguard was hit 3 times by the dense gunshots. Looking at the blood flowing out from his chest, the light in his eyes quickly dimmed. He wanted to shout out why, but he, who had already been drained of all his blood, could only move a little before falling onto the horse with a plop, forever losing all consciousness. Nizam was dead. Even if he did not die, it would not change the outcome of the battle. Under the gunshots and cannons, at least 3,000 cavalrymen were killed. Thousands of cavalrymen were injured and fell off their horses. As for the remaining thousands of cavalrymen and 10,000 infantrymen, they had already turned around and fled. What they saw today was completely out of everyone's expectations. This was not a battle at all. This was suicide. No one wanted to die, and no one wanted to die innocently. Their only choice was to flee. On the high platform, Nurahan clearly saw this scene. He even saw the scene where Nizam was killed by a spear. At this moment, his entire body was drenched in cold sweat. He finally understood why the 5-star army was able to win every battle despite their small numbers. With such powerful firearms, who could fight against them? Shock, astonishment, fear, and fear were no longer enough to express his current thoughts. Now, he just wanted to end this war quickly. If possible, he wanted to return to the Ares dynasty and never be enemies with the 5-star army again. His thoughts were in a mess until the cavalry of the 5-star army launched an attack. Only then did he regain his senses. Then, he waved the red and yellow flag in his hand. He knew that it would take time for the army to retreat. He had to mobilize the army on each mountain and let them charge forward to slow down the enemy's attack. Whether it was a counterattack or a retreat, they had to buy enough time. Within the 5-star army's camp, the cavalry charged forward. With the new army's cavalry as the lead, the cavalry of the 2nd Army's 2 divisions formed the 2nd echelon and launched the cavalry charge. What happened just now was like a nightmare for the Ares army. But to the 5-star army, it was indeed a victory that roused their morale. This was especially so for the army who didn't know much about firearms. When they saw the might of the 5-star army's firearms, they were filled with pride and excitement. At this moment, the army's morale reached its peak. When the order to charge was given, some of the cavalry's speed even caught up with the new army's 1st echelon. They couldn't wait to show off their skills on the battlefield. Charge down the mountain and stop the charging speed of the 5-star army's cavalry. The military order was like a mountain. The Ares army on the nearby mountains charged forward. It felt like a fierce tiger coming down from the mountain towards the 5-star army's cavalry from several directions. Boom, 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 boom. The 4th Division commander, Yi Xingfeng, had been waiting for this moment. He had been prepared to fire from the back. He had already brought the cannoneers to adjust the gauges and waited for the enemy to make a move. Now, it was finally time for them to show their might. The 100mm mortar shells fell like meteors from outer space and landed in the midst of the Ares army that was charging from the foot of the mountain. Every time the cannons fired, a dozen or even more soldiers would die. Under the bombardment, the Ares army that was originally full of vigor was in a mess. Under the powerful bombardment, the Ares army was completely unprepared. They had never seen the power of such a cannon before and were stunned. They couldn't even differentiate north from south as they ran around under the bombardment. But the more they were like this, the greater the number of casualties. They didn't know that under the bombardment, lying down and not moving was the best choice. The old soldiers were afraid of guns, and the new soldiers were afraid of cannons. But to the Ares army, they were all new soldiers. They didn't know how to deal with such an attack, and how to avoid the greatest number of casualties. Under the bombardment, the so-called reinforcements became a joke. They couldn't even protect themselves, and didn't even know where to run. The Ares army on the mountain was already in a mess. Using this opportunity, the 5-star army's cavalry charged to the back of the Ares army's vanguard. They used the speed of their horses and swung their swords. One by one, the Ares army fell to the ground as they wailed in pain. It's over, it's all over. Nurahan sat down on the high platform with a plop. From his position, he could see the entire situation. Because of this, he could see the Ares army's situation the clearest. He knew better than anyone else that the Ares army had lost. The army was already in a mess. There was no need to talk about morale. How could an army like this fight? How could they win a battle? Under the bombardment of guns, the situation on the battlefield was already one-sided. The Ares army's morale fell to the bottom. While they were terrified, they didn't have the courage to turn around and fight against the five-star army. They only wanted to escape, the further the better. It would be best if they didn't let the five-star army see them. In comparison, the five-star army's morale was at its peak. They shouted loudly as they galloped on the battlefield on their horses. They chased and killed batch after batch of defeated Ares soldiers. They were having a great time. The vanguard was defeated. 10,000 cavalry and 10,000 infantrymen were killed, one surrendered, and one escaped. There were originally 30,000 Ares army soldiers on each mountain. However, under the bombardment of the cannons, they didn't even have the chance to use half of their combat power before they were defeated and escaped. The mountains were filled with deserters. Their weapons were also abandoned everywhere. It was a miserable scene. In the main tent of the Ares army, scouts rushed in one after another and reported the situation of the vanguard 8 miles away. When bad news came one after another, Ridhar's expression changed from initial calm to anger. Then his whole body started to tremble and his eyes lost their luster. This five-star army is so powerful. What should we do? What should we do? Seeing that Deridar was at his wits' end, the expressions of the generals around him changed. The army couldn't do without a leader. But now that the leader was panicking, what should they do? General, let's escape now. The five-star army's cavalry is only 5 miles away. Escape? Riddle instinctively shook his head. We can't leave. We are only the vanguard. The main force of the army is still here. Yes, this time, the Ares dynasty sent a total of 150,000 troops. Now, only the 10,000 cavalry and 40,000 infantry of the vanguard lost the battle. They still had 110,000 troops in their hands. With this, they could fight any powerful enemy in a battle. Reporting. Just as Ridhar shook his head, another scout rushed into the tent. The moment he entered the tent, this young general didn't even dare to raise his head as he cried out. Reporting to the general, we have discovered a large number of five-star army cavalry on our left and right. They are currently moving towards us. Five-star army's cavalry on our left and right. What are our soldiers doing? Another piece of bad news came. Riddle was furious when he heard it. He roared loudly as if he wanted to eat someone. The scout was already scared to the point of kneeling on the ground. He didn't dare to explain anything. Fortunately, there were other generals who spoke. General, our soldiers on the mountain were scattered by the cannons of the five-star army. At this moment, Rydell finally came back to his senses. After 2 breaths, he let out a long sigh and said, "What the hell is going on? Those cannons are really that powerful. Is the heavens trying to destroy our army? General, let's just retreat. The morale of the army is in chaos. It's not a good time to fight the five-star army. Why don't we retreat first and think of a plan?" Seeing how Riddle was still depressed about the loss of the war, the other captains became anxious. Even if Riddle wanted to die, they didn't want to. However, if they escaped without a military order, they would be beheaded even if they returned to the Ares dynasty. Thus, they had to convince Riddle. Ridhar, who had long run out of ideas, looked at the generals requesting for retreat and knew that even if he wanted to continue fighting, there would not be any results. The morale of the army was at rock bottom. There was no need to continue fighting. Okay, retreat. Inform the vanguard to set up defenses and buy time for our main force to retreat. Helplessly, despite the unwillingness in his heart, Rydar had no choice but to give such an order. Chapter 1322. The Ares dynasty's army retreated. Without any preparation, they didn't even have time to tidy up their tents. Many of the military supplies were left behind as well. Thus, Ridhar only managed to escape with 50,000 cavalrymen, 150,000 soldiers, 50,000 cavalrymen, and 50,000 infantrymen. A small number of them died in the cannon fire and cavalry attacks. Nizam and the other generals died in battle. 70,000 people were captured, including Nurahan and the others. At the same time, they also seized a large amount of food, military equipment, and war horses. From the reports of the scouts and light cavalry that pursued the Ares dynasty, Ridhar escaped with 50,000 cavalrymen for hundreds of thousands of miles until they left the Ely region and returned to the Ares dynasty's territory. The victory was decided in one battle. It was carried out in an unstoppable manner without the slightest hesitation. The battle from the beginning to the end took less than 2 days. It ended with the five-star army's complete victory. In the main tent of the five-star army, Nurahan knelt on the ground with his hands tied. Opposite him was Yang Qindong, who was sitting there drinking tea and reading the battle report. In this battle, the five-star army used firearms to open the way. The enemy's army collapsed, and their morale was at an all-time low. In the end, they only lost less than 500 cavalrymen to achieve a great victory. As the Ares dynasty's army retreated from the battlefield, it could be imagined that the five-star army would have no opponents in the future. It was only a matter of time before they conquered this place. The result of the battle report made Yang Qindong in a good mood. When he looked at the kneeling Nurahan, his tone was not very strict. This king asks you, if the five-star army enters the Ares dynasty, can you resist? Nurahan, whose hands were tied behind his back, was already scared out of his wits. Or rather, he was completely shocked by the five-star army's firearms. Now that he heard Yang Qindong's question, he shook his head without hesitation. I can't. This result made Yang Qindong even more satisfied. Good. You can be considered a sensible person. Since that's the case, are you willing to go back and persuade your comrades to surrender? You have to know that this is not only an opportunity for you, but also an opportunity for the Ares dynasty. Otherwise, when the five-star army enters the Ares dynasty, they will win easily. At that time, who knows how many more people will die. This was the reason why Yang Qindong called Nurahan. If they could take over the Ares dynasty without bloodshed, of course, it would be for the best. Even if he couldn't achieve it, letting Nurahan leave would also make him a troublemaker. At that time, even if he could only persuade a small number of people to surrender, it would be a good thing. Nurahan, to the Ares dynasty, was to survive. Or to the Ares dynasties, to the Ares dynasty. When he thought of the power of the five-star firearms and the fact that he didn't want to see his country's citizens and army being slaughtered, he wanted to do something about it. Now that the opportunity had come, there was no reason not to seize it. He immediately nodded and said, "The surrender general is willing to surrender and is willing to persuade his comrades to surrender to the five-star army." Such a cooperative Nurahan naturally made Yang Qindong very happy. Good. Surrender to the Ares. Come, untie the general and take out 1,000,000 silver for him to use. If he has any requests, help him. Are you satisfied? Not only was his life guaranteed, but he also received 1,000,000 silver. How many things could he do? Nurahan had no reason to refuse. He knelt on the ground again and said with determination, "I thank Bugnam of Gojoseon for thinking so highly of me. This time, I will do my best and go through fire and water." Good. I hope you could do what you say. If you dare to play any tricks, then when I catch you, I promise I will let you experience what it means to live a life worse than death. After giving the sweet jujube, it was time to swing the big stick. Yang Qindong's voice carried a bit of coldness. I don't dare. Nurahan's body shook. He believed that the five-star army definitely had the ability to do so. He didn't want to die and didn't want to see his country's citizens die innocently. He knew that he had no other choice. Nurahan was let go just like that. Before leaving, other than writing a surrender letter, there were no other measures. Because of this, Beta Persei worriedly reminded him. It was clear that he had doubts about this person's loyalty. Don't worry, everyone knows that he was captured by us. Even if he faked his surrender, when he returns to the Ares dynasty, he won't be heavily used. Anyone with ambition wouldn't do such a stupid thing. Also, you have to have confidence in the five-star army. This time, he was already scared. Even his spine was broken. He won't dare to be our enemy. Regarding this point, Yang Qindong was 100 times more confident. Why did so many traitors appear in the future? Wasn't it because the Japanese's weapons and individual combat ability were too strong? On the other hand, the five-star army was much stronger than the Japanese at that time. Anyone who understood would know what to do. On the other hand, if Nuruhan's mentality changed, then what was the difference between killing him and not killing him? In the end, it was just a loss of 1,000,000 taels of silver. And if he persuaded more people to surrender, how could 1,000,000 taels of silver compare? He was willing to take this gamble. Ili's first army led by Bai Shuang, Yarqiang's five-star army led by Shi Wanshan. Turpan was destroyed, and the Aries dynasty and Kazakh's reinforcements were either pushed back or eliminated. The situation in this area became clearer. At this point, the five-star army already had the upper hand. As long as they didn't make any big mistakes, taking down this area was just a matter of time. Since this was the case, Yang Qindong was prepared to let go of everything and leave everything here to his subordinates. This was a type of training for them. At the same time, Yang Qindong also needed to make a trip back to Chichen City. Many lathes in a munitions factory were being put up. He was very worried and had to go back to take a look. This was related to the future development of Yangtze and the long-term benefits of the five-star army. Before deciding to leave, Yang Qindong handed the military command over to the commanders of each army, division, and regiment. In their words, when he wasn't here, the generals could do whatever they wanted. This was the time to test their abilities. In order to increase the fighting power of the army, Yang Qindong even left the 4th Army Division behind. Overall, Ili and the Yarqiang tribe still had the geographical and military advantage. If there wasn't such a strong army, some things would probably go wrong. After leaving the 4th Army Division behind, Yang Qindong didn't have any firearms by his side. Fortunately, he had already sent a telegram to the army headquarters. The 5th Army Division had already set off for the first city and should arrive earlier than them. The generals who stayed behind were naturally grateful when they saw that Yang Qindong trusted them so much. This kind of trust made everyone have the mentality of dying for someone who knew them well. He left behind most of the troops and only took the 1st Cavalry Division with him. Then, under the protection of 2,000 Black Knights, he returned to the first city with the 2nd Army that was in charge of logistics and transportation. This time, when he returned to the first city, Yang Qindong still had one more thing to do, and that was to get 1,000,000 Han people. This was the reward he asked for from Baiming for their sneak attack on him. But now, it seemed that things didn't go well. Even so, he didn't mind fighting a battle and letting the other party know that it wasn't that their five-star army didn't have the ability to defeat them, but that they just didn't want to do so. First city. At the headquarters of the new army, Tiger's Mane, Yangtze, and Yu Mian were sitting in a small conference room for a meeting. Yang Qindong had already made a decision on how to deal with the Baiming army's sneak attack on the supply transport team. As soon as they received the news, they reported this information to Governor Shi Heng in Tulu City. However, more than a month had passed since the time of reporting, but there was still no movement from the other party. On the contrary, the 6th young master had already returned and entered the new 2nd Army Shajing City. It would take him a few days to reach the first city. There must be an explanation for this matter. Otherwise, how could they answer the 6th young master when he asked? As the most trusted people of Yang Qindong, they were also entrusted with the important task of being in charge of the specific matters of the first city. The 3 of them must give an explanation, otherwise they would be incompetent. We still have to send someone to urge them. Give them 2 more days. There must be a result. As the first city's governor, Yu Mian was a scholar. In the past, he didn't think highly of generals. However, what he had seen and heard in the past few years made him clearly realize how important it was to have a powerful army. It could bring earth-shattering changes to the lives of the people. His mentality had also changed because of this. 2 days? What if the other party still doesn't reply when the time is up? Yangtze didn't seem to be satisfied with this answer. However, considering that Yu Qian and his son were talents that even the young master respected, he didn't speak so aggressively. Yu Mian, who was suddenly stumped, didn't know how to answer for a moment. Tiger's Mane, who was watching the show from the side, felt that it was about time. He said as if he was helping Yu Mian out, If they don't answer, beat them. How dare they ignore the sixth young master's words? How can we not teach them a lesson? This was the true intention of Tiger's Mane and Yangtze. To put it bluntly, they advocated using force to solve everything. However, Yumian had always disagreed. He always wanted to solve the problem through negotiation, so they waited and waited. Now that Yang Chendong was coming, they couldn't delay any longer. Therefore, the two of them called Yumian to put pressure on him. After all, the first city was sending troops. If the governor didn't cooperate, there would be some trouble. Beat them. This answer was clearly out of Yumian's expectations. Although he didn't reject generals, he still didn't like fighting and killing. It would be best if he could solve the problem through negotiation. Well, should we talk to Shi Hung again? If it doesn't work, we can reduce the number of people we want. Chapter 1323. Yumian thought that was too much to ask for 1 million Han people. If he could ask for less, perhaps Shi Hung would agree and a war could be avoided. Absolutely not. Yangtze immediately refused, and then he gave the reason. Young master's words cannot be changed. Yangtze said with a serious face, causing Yumian to sigh. Of course, he knew that Yang Chendong's words were like an imperial edict in the entire Yangtze and the five-star army. Unless he was willing to take it back, no one could change it. However, when he thought about the war that was about to begin, especially with the Han people, who knew how many of his brothers would die, his expression became unsightly. Noticing the change in Yumian's expression, Tiger's Mane sighed in his heart. A scholar was a scholar after all. He was still too soft-hearted. However, some problems that could not be solved politically could not be solved without a war. City Lord you don't have to worry too much. We are determined to win this war. The fifth Master Lu has already arrived at the first city and is ready to attack the city at any time. As long as we win, we don't have to worry about the other party not agreeing to our request. In that case, we will immediately rescue 1 million Han people. Isn't this what we want? When he said that they could save 1 million Han people, Yumian's expression became much better. He could not help but sigh. Yes, 1 million Han people can walk out of the abyss of suffering. It's worth it just for this point. Then I'll write a letter to inform Shi Hung and give them 2 more days. Yumian finally agreed to send troops. Tiger's Mane and Yangtze both breathed a sigh of relief. They began to look forward to the arrival of 2 days later. Tulu City. Shi Hung was sulking in his house with a face full of anger. Beside him, the 2 generals Zhou Qing and Jiang Xan also stood there with bitter expressions. They did not dare to speak for a long time. Reporting, First City Lord Yumian has sent a letter to Marquis. A bodyguard jogged into the courtyard and placed a letter sealed with wax on the stone table in front of Shi Hung. Then, he carefully retreated. He could tell that his master was in a bad mood. At this moment, he didn't dare to stay any longer. The letter was placed on the stone table. After about 5 minutes, Shi Hung snorted coldly and looked at his most trusted aide, Zhou Qing, and said, "Open it and read it." Zhou Qing did not dare to hesitate and immediately reached out to take the letter. Then, the contents were transmitted to the 3 of them. By the time he finished reading the letter, Shi Hung's expression had turned even uglier. He was so angry that his lips were trembling. This, even Yumian is forcing Marquis' hand. No wonder Shi Hung was so angry. When Yumian sent a letter to explain that the previous sneak attack had angered Bugnam of Gojoseon, his life had not been easy. First, Yumian made a request. If he wanted to solve this matter, Baiming had to send over 1 million Han people to settle the matter. When he received this letter, Shi Hung naturally did not dare to make the decision himself. So, he sent someone to send it to Baiming's capital. In the capital, Su Yozhen had already received the news and wanted to cooperate with Shi Hung to persuade Zhu Qiyu. However, this descendant of the Zhu family still had a backbone. Under the bottom line of not ceding land, not compensating, and not marrying into the country, the acting emperor did not listen to the advice of the ministers. Instead, he decided to fight. On this matter, a portion of the military officials agreed, But more importantly, the group of eunuchs also supported him. Gao Rang, the director of the East Depot, directly requested to send his nephew Gao Yu as the army supervisor to fight against the five-star army. In this matter, Gao Rang had won the first prize, which was exactly what Zhu Qiyu wanted. Even steward Jin Ing, who had wanted to dissuade the emperor from agreeing to the five-star army's request, had no choice but to change his mind and support this battle to resolve the problem. Jin Ing appeared to be a lofty official at Zhu Qiyu's side, and he could make many decisions. But in the end, his authority had been bestowed upon him by the emperor. If he did not have the emperor's support, then he was even lower than a dog. His position dictated that he had to follow the emperor's lead in all matters. With the support of the eunuch group, Zhu Qiyu issued an imperial edict, mobilizing 200,000 infantrymen from the capital and appointing Gao Yu as the army supervisor. A few outstanding youths from the great clans were appointed as generals. They were to head to Tulu City and fight against the five-star army to demonstrate Bai Ming's military strength. As if dissatisfied with Shi Heng's previous performance, Zhu Qiyu clearly stated in the imperial edict that the battle against the five-star army would be led by the great general of the Liaodong cavalry, Fang Dingshan, with the army supervisor Gao Yu as his support. This was tantamount to weakening Shi Heng's authority in the army. As a result, his position as commander-in-chief had become empty and transparent. This was what had truly angered Shi Heng. Now, Yu Mian had sent a letter urging him, and he had only given him 2 days. If he didn't agree, then he would fight. How could he not be vexed? But no matter how angry he was, he still had the position of commander-in-chief. There were still things that needed to be done. He looked at Zhou Qing, who had put down the letter. Jiang Xen, who was still standing to the side, asked, "Speak. Do the two of you have any good suggestions?" It didn't matter if they had an idea or not. Since their master had asked them to reply, they had to force their way in. Jiang Xan cupped his fists and said, "Marquis, we must take His Majesty's letter seriously. We have no chance of winning against the five-star army." Jiang Xian's answer clearly displeased Shi Heng. He first gave the other party a look that said, "You're an idiot. Of course, Marquis knows. But with the Emperor's imperial edict, I'm afraid that Gao Yu and Fang Dingshan are plotting something. What can I do?" Ever since Gao Yu had brought 200,000 soldiers to Tulu City a few days ago, he would often close the door and discuss matters with Fang Dingshan. Moreover, he had never notified Shi Heng to participate. Just this fact alone made him furious. In his heart, he didn't know how many times he had cursed Gao Rang and the group of eunuchs behind him. Of course, Fang Dingshan wasn't any better. He was also viewed by Shi Heng as a traitor. Jiang Xan was reprimanded, but there was no anger on his face. He was just giving a simple reply. "You told me to say it, so you can't blame me if I say it wrong. You say it." Unsatisfied with Jiang Xan's reply, Shi Heng's gaze fell on Zhou Qing. Compared to Jiang Xan, Zhou Qing was smarter and had more ideas. This was the main reason why Shi Heng placed him in an important position. At this time, he calmly cupped his fists and said, "Marquis, you don't have to be angry. We just need to send the letter out. As for how we do it, what does it have to do with us?" "What does it have to do with us? What do you mean?" For a moment, Shi Heng didn't understand. His face was filled with confusion and confusion. Zhou Qing laughed confidently and said, "Marquis, isn't the emperor going to fight with the five-star army? But he doesn't know the strength of the opponent. There's no chance of winning this battle. Since we know that we're going to lose, why don't we hide further away and leave the battlefield to them? When the time comes and we lose, it has nothing to do with Marquis. On the contrary, you can stand up and turn the tide. At that time, isn't it obvious who's stronger? Stay out of it." Pondering the meaning of Zhou Qing's words, Shi Heng seemed to suddenly understand. "You're saying that we should watch the show from the sidelines and watch others fail to distinguish ourselves? Marquis is brilliant." Zhou Qing hurriedly flattered and then retreated to the side with a smile. After receiving Zhou Qing's reminder, Shi Heng thought carefully and confirmed that this was the best way to deal with it. Wasn't Marquis dissatisfied? Then it's good that we withdraw from here and stay far away. This way, If we lose the battle, they can't blame me. Of course, for the sake of the future, he decided to write a letter to Yu Mian to express his difficulties. He also told him that Gao Rang had brought 200,000 soldiers to Talis City. This was not collusion, but a transaction. If one wanted to be understood, they had to pay a price. Otherwise, who would believe them? What would they use to form a friendship in the future? Shi Heng was a person who did not have the concept of country. In his eyes, there was only wealth and power. For this, he did not hesitate to sacrifice the interests of the country. It had to be said that using such a person was a tragedy for Baiming. After making his decision, Shi Heng quickly took action. He did 3 things in a row. First, he wrote a letter to Yu Mian in his own name, explaining his difficulties and the situation in Talis City, expressing his powerlessness. Second, he sent Yu Mian's letter to Feng Dingshan and Gao Yu, handing over the difficult problem. Third, he claimed that his health was not good and decided to go to the Wan All department to recuperate. Yu Mian's letter was quickly delivered to Feng Dingshan and Gao Yu. The threat in the letter was nothing to the two who had already decided to fight. On the contrary, they were more interested in the letter written by Shi Heng. When they saw that he was leaving Talis City, the two of them were overjoyed. In any case, Shi Heng still had the title of Commander-in-Chief and had operated here for a period of time. He had many trusted aides in the army. This person's presence would be a great hindrance to the two of them. If he could leave now, it would be of great benefit to their ability to command. This was something that they wished for, so how could they not agree? The two of them reached a consensus and agreed to Shi Heng's departure. They even expressed their condolences. After receiving the agreement, Shi Heng left Talu City in the afternoon, as if he did not want to get involved in this troublesome place. Without Shi Heng guarding Talu City, the military power was quickly divided between Feng Dingshan and Gao Yu. The two of them had 100,000 cavalry, 300,000 infantry, and 400,000 troops. The power of commanding 400,000 troops made the two of them somewhat arrogant. Needless to say, since they had an army, they naturally had to consider the matter of war. The two of them immediately made preparations to leave the city and fight the 5-star army. At the same time, Yu Mian also received Shi Heng's reply. Chapter 1324. With the existence of the intelligence department, every move in Tulu City was naturally not hidden from them. They had already inquired about the matter of Gao Yu supervising the army. But even so, Shi Heng's letter had its value. At least from this letter, it could be seen that the Baiming army was preparing to take action. We have no choice but to fight. Yu Mian looked at the letter and shook his head helplessly. He cupped his fist and said to Tiger's Mane and Yang Si, "Generals, I'm not good at war. I'll leave everything to you. Just tell me what you want to do and how you need my cooperation. Now, I'll mobilize the people in the city to be ready to support the front line at any time." Before the army and horses moved, the provisions moved first. Without enough money and food, it was impossible to win a big war or a victory. Yu Mian turned around and went to make preparations. Tiger's Mane and Yang Si, who were left behind, were both happy. They were warlike people from the bottom of their hearts. Now that they had a chance to show off, of course, they would not be polite. After a simple discussion, they raised the tent and made preparations before the war. Both sides were ready for the war. Whether it was the beginning city or Tulu City, they were shrouded in a tense atmosphere before the war. Yang Qindong, who was more than 100 miles away, was moving from Shajing City to the beginning city under the protection of the Black Cavalry. In Shajing City, Yang Qindong once again met with the commander of the new Second Army. Naturally, he was comforted. In the end, Yang Qindong also promised that if there was a need, he would prioritize the participation of the new Second Army in the upcoming war. This greatly moved Shi Bi, and he expressed that he would train his troops well and be ready to be summoned at any time. After Yang Qindong escaped from Shajing City and was heading to the beginning city, he received a telegram from Tiger's Mane. After learning that Baiming was not going to give in and still wanted to fight, he sneered and said, I really didn't expect that there would be a result so soon after I promised to do something else. Originally, Yang Shandong was prepared to find trouble with the Baiming army after reaching the beginning city. Now it seemed that they were more anxious than he was. Even so, he was not in a hurry to leave. He might as well watch from the side and wait for the right opportunity to give them a taste of their own medicine. It would definitely be very painful and very pleasurable. Men, set up camp. First, send the cavalry scouts to seal off this area. Do not allow anyone to spy on the appearance of our army here. Also, inform the sergeant commander to come and see me. Also, send a report to Tiger's Mane, Tulu City. Shiheng listened to his subordinate's suggestion and left the city. The courtyard he lived in was quickly occupied by Gao Yu, the military supervisor. Looking at the manor that occupied several hectares of land, Gao Yu's face revealed a satisfied expression. Although in terms of luxury, this place naturally couldn't compare to the capital. The mountains were high and the emperor was far away. No one cared about him, and he could do whatever he wanted. This was what satisfied him the most. Gao Yu was not a eunuch. He entered the East Faction Guards with the recommendation of his uncle, Gao Rang, and got an official position. When it came to women, he never knew how to restrain himself. After he took over this garden, Li Keguang and Ho Xiangjie sent over dozens of beauties to offer to him. Since Su Yozhen gave Zhu Qiyu the idea of bribing officials and criminals, the rich people have benefited from it. Some rich people have even gained a lot of benefits because of this. Li Keguang and Ho Xiangjie are the representatives among them. They were originally the sons of rich families. They belonged to the kind of people who were idle and didn't want to be high or low. Originally, they wanted to be the second generation of a rich family, but they didn't want the imperial court to allow them to buy officials. They didn't take money seriously, so they spent a lot of money and each got a 5th-rank military officer position. They were respectively awarded the position of Wu Jie General and Wu De General. From an idle son of a rich family to a 5th-rank general in the imperial court, this huge contrast made the two of them wild with joy. At the same time, it also made them even more ambitious for revenge. They hoped to climb to a higher position and bring glory to their family from then on. They had come to Tulu City with the army to make military contributions. If they really made military contributions and were willing to use money, wouldn't their future be limitless? The two came to the army with great ambitions. Their first goal was to curry favor with Gao Yu. Unlike the two of them, Gao Yu had an uncle who was the director of the East Faction Guards. In the Great Ming Dynasty, there was no need to doubt the status of eunuchs. As close officials of the emperor, they could often decide someone's life and death and future with a single word. Moreover, Gao Yu was the supervisor of the army, so they naturally had to curry favor with him. It was no exaggeration to say that as long as they made Gao Yu happy, even if they didn't make any contributions, they would be praised to the skies when they returned to the capital. On the contrary, if they offended this person, even if they made a great contribution, they wouldn't be able to enjoy it. In the manner, Li Keguang and Ho Xiangjie did everything they could to please Gao Yu. The Gao Yu they spoke of was really hard to find on the ground, and there were few ordinary heroes in the world. Even Gao Yu, who was used to flattery, couldn't help but feel a little smug. Army supervisor, no one can match your brilliance. Even Marquis Wukinghow has to give way. Li Keguang, who had a monkey-like face, said with his spittle flying all over the sky. Ho Xiangjie, who didn't want to be left behind, immediately said, "Of course, how powerful is our supervisor? How can that old man Shiheng compare with him? Just wait and see. As long as the supervisor takes action, the problem of the origin city will naturally be solved. What bullshit Bugnam of Gojoseon and the 5-star army will be beaten to a pulp." The flattery of the two made Gao Yu very satisfied, but at the same time, he was also a little embarrassed. He looked down on Shiheng. He had the power to command the army, but he never had any construction skills. It was really a performance of incompetence. But when it came to the 5-star army, especially Bugnam of Gojoseon, Gao Yu had to pay attention to it. In the past, he had dealt with this person in the capital. Later, he participated in many incidents against Yang Xie, so he knew some secrets. Yang Qindong was not to be trifled with. This was not only his opinion, nor was it only his uncle who said so. Even the emperor and the ministers thought so. Before going to war, his uncle had said more than once that if he really faced Yang Qindong, he had to think twice before acting. Gao Yu also thought that his uncle's words were very correct. Fortunately, he had already sent someone to inquire about it. Bugnam of Gojoseon and Yang Qindong were on the way to the origin city. He should not have come here so quickly. This gave him a lot of confidence. In his eyes, only Yang Qindong was worth paying attention to. As for the others, they did not even pass the imperial examination of the great Ming dynasty. They probably did not know much about the 4 books and 5 classics, and did not know many words. Of course, he would not put such an opponent in his eyes. Speaking of which, Gao Yu still underestimated Yang Qindong. He only got the news that Bugnam of Gojoseon was coming to the origin city. In his opinion, such a noble person would naturally walk very slowly, just like those nobles in the imperial court. If he walked faster, he would probably be tired. It was not an exaggeration to say that he was walking at the speed of a snail. Who knew how long it would take for him to reach the origin city? And he could take advantage of this opportunity to take the origin city. In this way, he could avoid a head-on battle with Yang Qindong and make a great contribution. Wouldn't that be great? Gao Yu seemed to have heard enough of Li Keguang's flattery. He casually waved his hand and stopped the two's flattery. The two of you, this military supervisor thinks highly of you. I hope that you will not disappoint me. I can also tell you that the military plan for the attack is about to take shape. It will be issued tomorrow at the latest. At that time, you two will be given the opportunity to lead the troops. You two must grasp it well. This was equivalent to leaking military secrets in advance. Li Keguang and Ho Xiangjie were excited when they heard this. They could lead the troops alone. Wasn't it time to show off? At that moment, both of them nodded excitedly and patted their chests to promise that they would not let Gao Yu down. The two of them went back excitedly and waited for a night. Just before noon the next day, the order was issued. Li Keguang got the position of the left vanguard, leading 10,000 troops. Ho Xiangjie got the position of the right vanguard, also leading 10,000 troops. As the vanguard, they went straight to the origin city from Tala City. They wanted to appear at the origin city at lightning speed and catch the enemy off guard. Then, the main army would appear one after another and complete the encirclement of the origin city. In order to win this battle, Baiming could be said to have paid a great price. Among the 200,000 reinforcements, there were 20,000 of them who were equipped with firearms. Among them, there were 5,000 God cannons and 5,000 God guns, 500 improved God cloth cannons that could shoot 300 meters away, and 2,000 new repeating guns. Speaking of repeating guns, this was based on the modified Type 81 automatic rifle that Yang Qindong gave to Jining. At that time, Yang Xie used this gun to exchange for 1,000,000 caddies of copper and iron. It could be said that he solved the problem of burning eyebrows. After Baiming got the Type 81 automatic rifle, they called all the skilled craftsmen. After so many years of hard work, they finally made a replica repeating gun that could hold 4 bullets and fire continuously. Because it was all handmade, there was no so-called lathe to match it. The manufacturing power was very limited, and it was easy to have problems. For example, the bullets were not on the scale, and things like jamming happened from time to time. Even so, it was not a small achievement to create a 4-style repeating gun. The shooting range of the gun was increased by 20 meters, reaching 120 meters. It was regarded as a treasure by Baiming Firearms Camp. The firearms camp with 20,000 people was one of Gao Yu's biggest trump cards. Both sides had firearms. The power was directly ignored by him. They had a lot of troops, and they had the help of 100,000 strong Liaodong Iron Cavalry. He was determined to take down the origin city. Chapter 1325. Gao Yu had once investigated the information and knew that the beginning city had once been surrounded by the Baiming army. They had only failed because the siege was not successful. But this time, He had the redcoat cannon and flintlock. As long as the siege was successful, he was confident that he could take down the city. That was the beginning city, which was regarded as the headquarters of the five-star army on the grassland. There were countless good things inside. Once they could take down the beginning city, it would not only mean that the five-star army had suffered a heavy blow on the grassland, but they would also gain countless benefits. Gao Yu's face was full of excitement. After discussing the specific military plan with Fong Dingshan, he returned to the manor. Unlike usual, he did not sleep with any woman that night. Instead, he went to bed early to prepare for the army's departure tomorrow. The beginning city. The intelligence personnel lurking in Tulu City had sent news through telegrams, explaining the unusual movements of the Beiming army. In the headquarters of the new army group, Tiger's Mane called his 3 corps commanders and a group of officers to discuss the military battle plan together. For 2 hours, the plan was revised again and again. Finally, there was a plan that everyone was satisfied with. In the end, Tiger's Mane and Yang Si made the final decision, and all the military directors received their respective tasks. When a meeting was about to end, Tiger's Mane said, "Everyone, this battle is the first big battle since the establishment of our new army group. The goal is very simple. Seriously speaking, it's just a small test for us. But I want to remind you that the 6th young master is watching behind us. This time, not only do we have to win the battle, but we also have to show our best side and let the 6th young master see the military style of our new army group. If you perform well, you will naturally be rewarded after the battle. On the other hand, if anyone attacks, it will be because of carelessness or disobeying orders, which leads to changes on the battlefield or even losses, then you'll be punished by military law. Do you understand?" Understood. Hearing that Yang Qindong was watching from a short distance away, everyone perked up. To be able to perform well in front of the 6th young master was the hope of many. All of them straightened their backs with an eager expression. After the meeting, the entire first city began to move. The entire new army of more than 100,000 soldiers was quickly mobilized. A solemn atmosphere spread throughout the city. It was June, and the grassland had become warm, although it was not as hot as the south, where it was more than 30 degrees below zero. The highest temperature during the day was about 27 or 28 degrees. Especially at noon, when the sun shone on people, there was a roasting smell. In order to avoid the army being roasted under the sun, Gao Yu and Fong Dingshan had a discussion. At 3 o'clock in the morning, when the sky was still dark, they let the army out of the city and then quickly rushed in the direction of the first city. As the left and right vanguard, Li Keguang and Ho Xiangji's mission was to charge into Saihan Mountain immediately and open up the path to the beginning city to ensure that the army could travel smoothly. In order to complete the mission and take down this place, the two of them had done a lot of work. They even took the initiative to increase the silver reward for military merit. They would rather supplement some of it themselves so that they could have a good start. Under the stimulation of the silver, the morale of the soldiers was greatly boosted. Everyone patted their chests and looked like they were going to risk their lives. Under the excited momentum, the two vanguard armies totaling 20,000 soldiers came to the foot of Sion Mountain and launched an attack. However, what made them depressed was that the 5-star army on the mountain had already retreated. Not even a shadow could be seen. This result naturally made the two of them a little discouraged. The feeling of punching cotton made them want to vomit blood. What's going on? Why can't I see the 5-star army? Could it be that they received the news in advance and escaped? Li Keguang's face was gloomy, and he said with a gloomy face. Ho Xiangji on the side didn't look so dispirited. Instead, his eyes turned quickly. When he saw that no one was paying attention to him, he leaned in front of Li Keguang and whispered, "Brother Li, this may be a good thing." Good thing? Li Keguang looked puzzled. He even looked at Ho Xiangjia as if he was looking at an idiot. "Yes, it's a good thing," Ho Xiangjia said with a very confident look. "Brother Li, the military supervisor doesn't know what happened here. Isn't it up to us to say what happened?" Li Keguang, who somewhat understood Ho Xiangjia's meaning, suddenly trembled. Then he looked at him in disbelief and said, "It can't be. Are you saying that we have to fake military merit?" In the Great Ming Dynasty, it was not uncommon to fake military merit. This was especially true in the later stages of the war with slave Jian. Because the imperial court had strict requirements that the reward for beheading the enemy was a certain amount, the Great Ming soldiers who couldn't defeat slave Jian on the battlefield would indiscriminately slaughter ordinary people in order to obtain the reward and then turn in their heads to the imperial court. For this reason, it was unknown how many people of the Great Ming Dynasty died because of it. In contrast, Ho Xiangjia's idea wasn't unreliable. At least they had already captured Saihan Mountain, seized this territory, and completed the military order. Under Ho Xiangjia's guidance, Li Keguang quickly agreed. After all, this was something that was beneficial to the two of them. Afterward, the two of them sent out scouts to report back, saying that they had fought a huge battle with the 5 Astral Army on Mount Saihan. They had defeated their opponents and successfully occupied Mount Saihan, an important military location. They had also killed many 5 Astral Army soldiers. When the battle report was sent back to Gao Yu, he was naturally overjoyed. He also sent this news to General Fong Dingshan. General Fong, look, we have won a great victory. Not bad. Looking at this battle report, a satisfied expression flashed across Fong Dingshan's face. In fact, he wasn't optimistic about the 200,000 troops brought by Gao Yu. This army was composed of new recruits. An army that had never seen blood and didn't have war horses would not be at an advantage when fighting on the grassland. However, they had a good start in the first battle. This was a good thing for the morale of the army, so he was naturally happy. There was even a faint hope in his heart. Perhaps cooperating with Gao Yu this time would be far more fruitful than cooperating with Shi Heng. After the news of the victory of the Baiming army in the first battle spread, the morale of the army improved a lot. Even the speed of their journey increased a little. As the vanguard, Li Keguang and Ho Xiangjia were praised by Gao Yu and received new orders. They were to continue to move forward and strive to reach the beginning city as soon as possible to catch the 5-star army off guard. If they could take the opportunity to enter the city, it would definitely be the first merit. When they saw the 2 words, first merit, the two of them were naturally excited. The victory on Saihan Mountain made them underestimate the enemy. After all, they didn't really fight with the 5-star army. In order not to let the people have panic thoughts and emotions, the Baiming Imperial Court didn't publicize the power of the 5-star army. Ignorant people didn't care. The two of them led 20,000 infantrymen down Saihan Mountain and quickly went to the beginning city. In order to achieve the first merit, they didn't even leave any troops at the foot of the mountain. This alone showed their incompetence and inexperience. The 2 generals left Saihan Mountain excitedly and went straight to the beginning city. In order to snatch the first merit, they didn't stop to rest. They rushed day and night and arrived in front of the beginning city on the 3rd day. The sudden appearance of 20,000 Baiming army outside the city seemed to be greatly beyond the expectations of the 5-star army. The city gate quickly closed and showed a panicked look. Haha, the 5-star army was really unprepared. The scene in front of him made Li Keguang very excited. However, when he turned around to look at the infantryman behind him, there was a hint of disappointment in his eyes. It's a pity that the army is very tired after rushing for days. Otherwise, we could have won the battle. Yes, the beginning city wall is very tall. It's not something that can be defeated by tired soldiers. I think we should wait for a while, Ho Xiangjia said with a look of pity. Facing the beginning city wall that had been reinforced more than once, it was very difficult to take it down. Moreover, the Baiming army had rushed for days, and their combat power was less than 30% of their usual strength. If they attacked the city now, it was no different from courting death. The 2 generals felt that it was a pity that they couldn't attack the city immediately. However, they didn't know that if they attacked the city now, they would only die. The beginning city wasn't something that could be easily attacked. Moreover, the 5-star army in the city was already prepared. If they attacked now, they would be courting death. Li Keguang and Ho Xiangjia, who were unaware of the situation, thought that they had seized a great merit and had blocked the 5-star army within the city gates. Thus, They hurriedly sent someone to send a message to the rear troops, exaggerating their merits. In order to make it seem more realistic, they even added a lot of merits. For example, they had fought a great battle with the 5-star army outside the city and had won, sending them back into the city. The battle report was sent by the cavalry to Gao Yu, who was not far from Tala City. It made him exclaim happily, "Ha! The two of you are really famous generals. Well done. Come, inform General Fong of this news. At the same time, order the army to speed up and rush to the beginning city as soon as possible to join General Li and General Ho." Gao Yu, who had underestimated the 5-star army and overestimated the strength of his army, was excited. It seemed that the great merit was in front of him. At this moment, he looked down on Shi Hung even more. Even he, who had never led an army, could besiege the beginning city in a short time. He didn't know why Wu Qinghe would be afraid of the 5-star army. Now it seemed that it was not an exaggeration to call him a stupid general. Fong Dingshan, who was leading 100,000 cavalry, also received the news quickly. He was not surprised by it. After all, the beginning city had been besieged before. Now it was just a repeat of the past. It was nothing. He just hoped that this trip would not be as fruitless as last time. Under the beginning city, Li Keguang and Ho Xiangjia, who had rested for an afternoon and night, walked out of their respective big tents with radiant faces. Then, they ordered the troops to attack the city. The 20,000 Baiming army, who didn't encounter any opponents, also had high morale. After an order, they launched the first attack on the south gate of the beginning city in front of them. Chapter 13:26. The Baiming army took turns to attack. Every time, 1,000 Baiming army soldiers would launch a probing attack. The two generals were even prepared to be heavily injured. However, when they really attacked the city, they realized that the 5-star army was only putting up a hasty resistance. It wasn't too intense. It gave people the feeling that if the city wasn't high enough, they might have already broken through. Ha! After a morning of fighting, Li Keguang believed that he had seen the strength of the 5-star army. He laughed loudly and said to Ho Xiangjia, "Brother Ho, did you see that? The 5-star army is only SOSO. We can increase our attack in the afternoon." That's right. Ho Xiangjia also had the same view. Then, he changed the strategy of attacking the city. This time, the number of soldiers attacking the city increased from 1,000 to 2,000. On the tower outside the city, Yang Si was looking at the Baiming army leisurely. He didn't look nervous at all. It was as if this battle had nothing to do with him. "Commander Yang, the Baiming army has sent 2,000 people to attack the city this time." Li Yin ran to Yang Si and gave a standard military salute. The recon division's learning and training ended after they dealt with the 10,000 Baiming Liaodong cavalry. Li Yin returned to the logistics headquarters and was promoted from a company commander to a battalion commander. "Yes, you can send 1,000 recruits and 200 veterans to help defend the city. Tell the soldiers not to be afraid of death. On the battlefield, only those who are afraid of death will die faster. Warriors who aren't afraid of death can't be killed." Yang Si looked at Li Yun with satisfaction and admiration. "Yes." After saluting, Li Yun turned around to make the arrangements. Yang Si was left laughing. He believed that the Baiming army wouldn't have guessed that the troops defending the city this time would mainly be recruits sent by the foreign races from the logistics headquarters. This was the result of his discussion with Tiger's Mane and Yu Mian. They reported it to Yang Qindong and got his approval. In the eyes of the 5-star army, the Baiming army was as weak and docile as a lamb. This was a group of vile people who spoke of benevolence, righteousness, and morality every day, but actually did despicable and shameless things behind their backs. Every day, they opened their mouths and talked about the words of Confucius and the words of the saints. But in reality, they were just people who recognized a few more words and knew how to write some useless poems. If it wasn't for the great Ming dynasty's generous treatment, these scholars wouldn't have anyone to serve them. They wouldn't even know how to cook or plow the fields. They would just be pure parasites. In the later period of the Great Ming, it was about using benevolence to rule the world and using benevolence to convince people. Many virtuous paragons believed that they could rely on their silver tongue to wander the world in an invincible position and play with their enemies in the palm of their hands. Such arrogant people were already outdated in this world. If it weren't for the five-star army's protection, they would have been slapped in the face a long time ago. That's right, the Beiming imperial court was currently under the protection of the five-star army. Looking at its geographical location, other than the southern Ming dynasty in the south, the surrounding areas were all occupied by the five-star army. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that Beiming was a lonely place. In other words, as long as the five-star army didn't make a move against them, Beiming would be safe and auspicious. For an army like this to think that they were the best in the world and look down on the five-star army, it had to be said that it was truly laughable. To deal with an army like this, the five-star army didn't need to send out any elites. They didn't even need to send out a regular army. As long as they sent out the new recruits from the logistics headquarters who had never been on the battlefield, it would be enough to deal with everything. They could pretend that they weren't a match for the enemy and achieve the goal of mobilizing the enemy's army. They could also train the soldiers on the battlefield. This was something that Yang Si naturally had to do. This was why Li Keguang and Hou Xiangjie didn't feel that the five-star army was powerful. This was also something that the five-star army did on purpose. They were using the strategy of luring the snake out of its hole. Since the Beiming army took the initiative to provoke them, they had to be ruthless. This was to prevent them from coming out to cause trouble while the five-star army was fighting. Since they were going to be ruthless, they had to defeat as many of the Beiming army as possible. However, if they were too ruthless, it was inevitable that the Beiming army would be afraid of the enemy and retreat to defend Talis City. Yang Qindong didn't want to be unable to annihilate a large number of the enemy's forces in the battle. Therefore, they had to retreat step by step and show weakness step by step in order to lure more Beiming army out of Talis City and surround them in one fell swoop. In order to achieve this goal, after Yang Si and the others discussed and reported to Yang Qindong, they were even prepared to give up the outer city. Now it seemed that the plan was going smoothly. The ignorant Beiming army was indeed fooled. The siege continued, and both sides suffered losses. There were more than one crisis at the south gate of the outer city, but they were all defeated because the Beiming army's forces were too few. This made Li Keguang and Hou Xiangjie regret for a while. They could only hope that the main army would appear and then take advantage of their superior forces to occupy the beginning city and obtain great merits. 3 days later, the main force of the Beiming army finally arrived. Gao Yu appeared on top of the beginning city's gate with a total of 150,000 troops, accompanied by 20,000 firearms barracks. As for the 100,000 Liaodong cavalry led by Fang Dingshan, they didn't go with them. Instead, they wandered around in the vicinity. This showed Fang Dingshan's wisdom. He didn't think highly of Gao Yu as the army's supervisor, so he didn't go with him. The advantage of this was that once the situation changed, they could evacuate immediately and their strength wouldn't be damaged. Without Butcher Zhang, we won't be eating hairy pigs. Although Gao Yu was a little unhappy about Fang Dingshan's unwillingness to cooperate, wasn't this an opportunity? If he could take down the beginning city without this person's help, wouldn't the great merit fall on him? Based on the fact that his uncle was Gao Rang, the director of the East Factory, Gao Yu didn't think that anyone would have the guts to steal his credit. Therefore, as soon as he arrived at the beginning city, he called Li Keguang and Hou Xiangjie and gave them a big reward for their good performance. Then he asked about the situation of the war and saw the Beiming army besieging the city and the five-star army in a stalemate. Good. You two did a good job and made a great contribution. The army supervisor, will put in a good word for you in front of the emperor. Next, I will give each of you 20,000 infantry. I hope you can continue to work hard and make new contributions. Gao Yu laughed happily. The two people who were praised were also very excited. They immediately said that as long as they had enough troops, they could take down the beginning city and ask Gao Yu to wait for the good news. Li Keguang and Hou Xiangjie, who were praised and entrusted with important tasks, launched a more fierce attack the next morning. For a time, the beginning city was filled with shouts and shouts. There would be blood splashing on the South City Tower every moment. It was very tragic. It was unknown whether it was because they were too excited or too agitated, but Li Keguang and Hou Xiangjie didn't notice that the number of casualties among the infantry they sent out wasn't many. On the contrary, the number of injured soldiers was very considerable. Of course, they would not think that this was originally the five-star army's mercy. Once this army was surrounded, these Beiming army soldiers might become prisoners. They were Han Chinese, so it was better not to kill them. Another 2 days of iron and blood besieging the city. The Beiming army had to retreat because 3,000 soldiers were killed and 15,000 were injured. This also made Li Keguang and Hou Xiangjie depressed. In their view, the besieging army was about to succeed several times, but with the five-star army's counterattacks, they had to retreat. The feeling of failure when they were about to win made them very uncomfortable. In 2 days of besieging the city, they lost nearly 20,000 soldiers. This result made Gao Yu somewhat dissatisfied. He called Li Keguang and Hou Xiangjie again and asked them how confident they were in taking down the city. They were not as confident as they were 2 days ago. This time, the two of them were hesitant. Gao Yu knew that this was a sign of their lack of confidence, but he did not blame them. After all, it was not easy for them to achieve such a result on their first time leading an army. In my opinion, we can't continue to lose soldiers like this. Tomorrow, we will use the firearms camp. After the cannons attack, the two of you will lead the army to attack. You should be able to achieve great results. How about it? Hearing that they were going to use the firearms camp, Li Keguang and Hou Xiangjie were very excited. They immediately patted their chests and promised that they would be able to take down the city tomorrow. Gao Yu was naturally satisfied with the confidence of the two. He immediately gave the two of them 20,000 soldiers each as encouragement. Then, he called over the firearms camp's general, Wei Ku, and ordered him to immediately set up the formation and coordinate with the infantry to attack the city tomorrow. Wei Ku was Yang Guang's subordinate. Yang Guang was also the highest officer in the Beiming firearms camp that Yang Chendong had arranged. Of course, Wei Ku didn't know about this. He only remembered that General Yang Guang had told him not to weaken the firepower camp's prestige. He wanted him to put up a good show to show the military's might. Wei Ku, who listened to Yang Guang's words, held a torch and set up the cannons at night, making a lot of noise. On the top of the city wall, the scouts who were responsible for watching the Beiming army's every move naturally saw it clearly. They quickly reported it to the logistics command commander, Yang Si. "Oh, are we going to use the cannons?" Pass down the order. Except for a small number of troops hiding in the safety of the city wall, all the main forces of the army will withdraw from the outer city to the inner city wall overnight. Yang Si, who was already prepared for this, passed down the order. Compared to the Beiming army's firearms camp, the five-star army did not have any torches. Under the moonlight, they quietly withdrew from the outer city wall. The Beiming army, who was completely unaware of all this, prepared to bombard the outer city gate early in the morning the next day. Tens of thousands of Beiming army infantrymen were also waiting under the command of Li Keguang and Hou Xiangjie. Seeing that the morale of the army was so high, Gao Yuzhua was full of confidence in his carriage. Following his loud shout, they began to attack. Wei Ke led the firearms battalion to take the lead and launched an attack. Hundreds of cannons fired in unison. The momentum of the cannons bombarded the southern gate. Chapter 13:27. Boom, boom, boom. Boom, boom, boom. As the cannons rumbled, several hundred explosive cannonballs landed on the city walls and gates of the southern city, causing a strange phenomenon as if an earth dragon had flipped over. The sound of the cannons went on for an hour. Looking at the tower of the South City, it was already full of holes. Even the South City gate had been blasted into pieces. The cave door was wide open, like a young girl who was open for anyone to take advantage of. Ha ha charge! Seeing that the city gate had been broken, Li Keguang and Hou Xiangjie led the tens of thousands of soldiers excitedly, shouting as they charged forward. There were a few five-star army soldiers lying in ambush on top of the South City Tower. Because they had entered a safe zone in advance, they didn't suffer any losses. Seeing a large number of Biming army charging at them, they followed the plan and fired 2 volleys of arrows at the city gate tower. After killing and injuring several thousand Biming army soldiers, they quickly retreated. The South City Tower changed hands. Taking this opportunity, the 2 generals led their troops to the east, west, and north respectively. After paying a certain price, they successfully occupied the outer city of the beginning city. The outer city was breached. When the news came, Gao Yu was naturally very excited. He waved his fist fiercely to vent the excitement in his heart. In the main tent, Li Keguang, Ho Xiangjie, and Wei Ku were standing together. Gao Yu looked at the 3 of them with appreciation and said with satisfaction, "You guys have done very well. This supervisor has already submitted a memorial to the emperor regarding your performance. The reward should be coming soon. Many thanks to military supervisor for your promotion." The 3 generals said excitedly, "Very good. This military supervisor wants to tell you and the others that you will be rewarded for your contributions. You should work even harder. Now that we've taken the outer city, when can we take the inner city and attack the inner city? That's what we need to discuss today. If you have any suggestions, feel free to raise them." Gao Yu began to ask questions after a round of praise. After all, conquering and occupying the entire origin city was his goal. Conquering the outer city was just the first step. With the previous victory, the 3 generals were each more courageous than the other when it came to strategizing. After listening to the opinions of the 3 people, Gao Yu finally understood the opinions of the 3 people. That was, they still needed to increase the number of troops. The best plan was to take down the first city in one go with the advantage of a strong military force. Although the Biming army managed to capture the outer city with the help of the cannons, their losses were not small. Originally, there were 170,000 infantrymen. They could only win, not lose. This was his creed. Yang Qindong silently nodded. Although the mission was a bit difficult, if the new Second Army wanted to stand up again, they had to go through this kind of experience. Without looking back, Yang Qindong ordered again 1 division of the new Second Army and 1 division of the Second Army. Make use of the advantage of the war horses to cut down the encirclement of the 80,000 infantrymen. This is to inflict heavy damage on the enemy and destroy their morale. Yes, the 2 commanders, Shibi and Nyo Duo, immediately agreed, expressing that they would pass on the mission to their subordinate division commanders. At this point, Yang Qindong turned his gaze to the 1st Cavalry Division's commander, Tian Hu, who had been standing there like a pole but hadn't accepted a mission yet. When he saw Yang Qindong's gaze, Tian Hu straightened his back. Although he didn't say anything, his meaning was quite clear. "Sixth young master, if you have any difficult missions, leave them to us. We promise to complete them." "Commander Tian, 100,000 Biming Liaodong cavalry have disappeared from our line of sight. They might appear at any time. Your mission is to stop them from entering the battlefield and inflict as much damage as possible. This is a powerful enemy. Biming has invested a lot in them, and they have 5 times your number. Can you stop them?" When Yang Qindong asked this, he was also carefully observing Tian Hu's expression. Speaking of which, their mission was the most difficult. If they didn't handle it well, it was possible that the whole division would be wiped out. When he heard that they were finally going to face Biming's Liaodong cavalry, even though he knew that the other party had 100,000 soldiers, Tian Hu didn't show any fear on his face. On the contrary, there was only a rumbling fighting spirit. "Sixth young master, don't worry. Our 1st Cavalry Division is not afraid of any opponent or enemy. No matter if they are weak or strong, as long as they face us, they will only be defeated." "Good." Hearing Tian Hu's confident answer, Yang Qindong walked forward and patted his shoulder, then said, "Your fighting spirit is commendable. But I still have to say that the opponent this time is not simple. You must not be careless. I have already sent a new group of soldiers. They will send people out of the city to help you. There's also a heavy cavalry regiment near the beginning city. If things go wrong, they will go to the beginning city and meet up with them to launch a counterattack. Remember, don't use loyalty in war, and don't use the lives of your soldiers as a stepping stone. When Tianhu heard such sincere words, he once again stood at attention and said, "Sixth young master, I will remember your words in my heart. Watch my performance." Well, I will watch your performance. Speaking of which, this king is preparing to expand the world's first cavalry division into an army. I hope that you can have the vision of a general. What this king wants is a general who could devise strategies, not a tiger general who can only charge in a battle. Do you understand? This was the first time Yang Qindong talked about expanding the first cavalry division into an army in public. There wasn't any news about it before, so everyone was surprised after hearing it. The current 1st Cavalry Division already had 20,000 soldiers. Its combat strength was not something that any army could compare with. Now that he wanted to expand it, didn't that mean that its combat strength was close to that of a group army, or even surpassing them? There was no doubt that once it became an army, the value of a commander would definitely surpass that of other commanders. Even the power of a group army commander would be on par with that of a group army commander. After everyone understood this, they looked at Tianhu with envy and a little jealousy. Tianhu's face turned red. This meant that the 6th young master wanted to promote him. At the same time, it was also a kind of affirmation to the 1st Cavalry Division. He immediately stood at attention and said, "Yes, 6th young master, please rest assured. Tianhu is a wise general, not just a general who knows how to kill." Knowing that Tianhu understood the meaning of his words, Yang Qindong patted his shoulder with satisfaction and said, "Very good. Then I will watch your performance. Don't let me down." "Yes, teacher." After feeling Yang Qindong's ardent expectations, Tianhu changed the way he addressed him and called him teacher. This was to express in private that he would definitely complete the mission. The combat missions of the various troops had been completed. Yang Qindong's gaze wandered around the faces of the 3 military commanders. Then he nodded and said, "Well, I look forward to your performance. Let's set off now." "Yes." After Tianhu, Shi Bei, and Niu Duo saluted in unison, they turned and walked towards the troops. After watching the 3 of them leave, Beta Persei, who was standing at the side, came over and asked in a low voice, "Young master, what are we going to do? Our 2,000 black cavalry has been itching for a fight." In this battle, the Baiming army sent 80,000 infantrymen out of the city, and there were 50,000 defending infantrymen in Tulu City who could come out at any time. In addition to the 100,000 Liaodong cavalry who had been wandering outside without a fixed residence, there were a total of 200,000 people. On the other hand, Yang Qindong only had 20,000 people from the 1st Cavalry Division, more than 20,000 people from the 3 divisions of the new 2nd Army, and more than 10,000 people from the 2 divisions of the 2nd Army. In total, there were only 60,000 people. The difference in strength was more than 3 times, but Beta Persei was not nervous at all. On the contrary, he was worried that the 2,000 black cavalry would have no battle to fight. It had to be said that he was very careless, but also proved how much trust and confidence he had in Yang Qindong. Chapter 1328. What's wrong? More than 200,000 enemies aren't enough for the black cavalry? Just wait and see. We'll go wherever there's danger. Yang Qindong chuckled. He liked Beta Persei's optimistic personality and fearless courage. Hearing that the black cavalry could go to the battlefield, Beta Persei immediately laughed. "Okay, young master, then I'll tell my brothers the news now. I guarantee that they'll all be overjoyed." First city. The military report of 80,000 Baiming infantry leaving Terror City was also sent to Tiger's man via telegram. He first laughed, then looked at the logistics command commander Yang Si, Castellan Yu Mian, division commander Xiao Yining of the 5th Division Lu, and 3 other commanders and a division commander in the conference room. He said in a deep voice, "It's time for our new army group and first city to stretch our hands. Now announce the order." After everyone, including Yumian, stood up straight, Tiger's man said, "The 101st Division and the Heavy Cavalry Regiment will go out of the city to find the Beiming Liaodong Cavalry and cooperate with the 1st Cavalry Division to find and destroy the enemy. The 102nd Division and the 103rd Division will surround the Beiming army outside the city from the left and right respectively and strive to capture all of them. The 5th Division Lu will cover the Beiming army's artillery camp before the battle and go out of the city to severely damage the enemy's firearms camp. Let them know that we're their ancestors when it comes to firearms. The Logistics Command will be responsible for going out of the city to take care of the prisoners and clean up the battlefield. The Castellan's Mansion will be responsible for defending the city and security in the city. At the same time, empty several hospitals in the city and prepare to receive the enemy's wounded." After issuing several orders in a row, Tiger's man suddenly raised his voice and said, "The 6th young master will be watching this battle not far away. Whoever has a problem should prepare to leave the army and go back to retire. We promise to complete the mission." Everyone answered in unison. As the 5-star army continued to grow stronger, the number of reserve talents also increased. Who knew how many people were eyeing the position below their buttocks? If he didn't perform well, Tiger's mane wasn't joking. He would really retire early. This was related to his own future, so he couldn't afford to be careless or careless. Tiger's mane knew that his words had worked when he saw the solemn expressions on everyone's faces. He nodded quietly and then said, "Okay, go and prepare. Rest well tonight. Tomorrow morning, we will go out and fight." Sion Mountain. This was an important mountain between the first city and Tulu City. As a link between the two cities, it served as a buffer. Sion Mountain, which had experienced countless wars, had changed hands many times. It was used as the gate of the first city to defend against enemies. This time was no exception. Beiming's first target was this place. However, because the 5-star army was prepared and gave up in advance, it allowed Beiming's army to take down this important place without shedding any blood. However, because it was too easy to get, it didn't attract enough attention. Even Li Keguang and Ho Xiangjie, who were the vanguard generals, didn't leave any troops here. However, when Gayu passed by here, she casually pointed and arranged for 3,000 soldiers to be here. Most of these 3,000 soldiers were made up of new recruits. Many people were happy to be arranged here. Originally, they joined the army for food and pay. In the eyes of such people, there was no such thing as loyalty to the country. The facts also prove that after they changed from ordinary people to members of the Beiming army, their lives didn't change much. The salary wasn't distributed in time, and they were usually only 60% full after eating. This made them complain a lot. This time, when they heard that they were going to fight against the awe-inspiring Bugnam of Gojoseon and the powerful 5-star army, many soldiers were scared before the battle. They just wanted to eat food and didn't have any great ambitions. There was no one above them. And even if they made military achievements, most of them would be taken away, and their future was bleak. They just wanted to live and become soldiers. It was too difficult for such people to show their heroic side on the battlefield. Fortunately, these 3,000 soldiers were lucky. They didn't need to go to the front line. They only needed to guard the mountain and watch the Beiming army supplies pass smoothly. This made the 3,000 soldiers very happy. They didn't need to fight, and they might be able to get military achievements. This was really a blessing from the heavens. For this reason, the 3,000 soldiers had a good celebration. Then, the next day, they began to guard the mountain and muddle along. They were muddling along because they had nothing to do from morning to night. Apart from occasionally seeing the Beiming supply vehicles, they didn't see anyone else. As for the 5-star army, they didn't even see a shadow. After a few days, the initial nervousness had disappeared. Now, when the sky had just turned dark, apart from 200 soldiers who were normally on duty, the rest of the 3,000 soldiers had entered the temporary military tent and started to talk with Zhougong. In the pitch-black night, 50 well-trained scouts with sharp blades in their mouths approached quickly under the cover of the trees. They were like agile monkeys, flashing and moving behind the Beiming army soldiers. As they continued to move, The Baiming army soldiers were either killed or knocked unconscious. In just 15 minutes, the 200 Night Watch soldiers had lost all signs of life. When Mo Benyi, the commander of the 306th Division of the Year Army, saw this scene, he couldn't help but shake his head. New recruits are new recruits. There's no challenge at all. They didn't even send out hidden sentries. All right, everyone go up. Don't make any noise. Get ready to capture the prisoners. The 3,000 Baiming army soldiers who didn't have the slightest bit of vigilance and never thought that someone would attack them had large swords pressed against their necks while they were still sleeping in their tents. The entire operation was methodical and orderly. In this battle, other than the 123 Baiming army soldiers who were killed at the beginning, the rest, including the general, were all captured. No one resisted, and this Baiming army was completely wiped out. Send a message to the military commander. Tell him that we've taken down Mount Sion. Mo Benyi instructed the radio operator sent by the military. With his rank, he wasn't qualified to be on a radio. If he hadn't come out alone to complete the mission, he wouldn't have been able to enjoy such treatment. As they didn't make any noise, the Baiming army didn't know that Mount Sion had changed hands. It wasn't until the afternoon of the second day that the 80,000 reinforcements from Tulu City passed by this place that they realized the danger ahead was imminent. These rocks were placed by the 306th Division soldiers overnight and half a day. Of course, the 3,000 Baiming captives also contributed a lot. As the huge rocks rolled down one after another, the Five-Star Army's full-scale counterattack began. As Mo Benyi's side began to take action, the Five-Star Army in Beginning City also began their counterattack. The Lu 5th Division in the city had already locked onto the Baiming Army's firearms camp outside the city. After the order was given, cannonballs were shot out from within the city. After a few consecutive shots, explosions sounded one after another. The resulting explosions formed a sea of fire, alarming the 100,000 Baiming infantrymen below the city. What's going on? Gao Yu, who heard the explosions, rushed out of the main tent. His face was filled with panic and anger. However, his anger quickly turned into fear. One after another, scouts appeared in front of him as if they had agreed to meet. Reporting to the military supervisor, the Five-Star Army's cannons hit our firearms camp's cannons. Now all the cannons have exploded and the cannonballs have also been detonated. The firearms camp has lost the ability to fight and suffered heavy losses. Reporting to the military supervisor, the Five-Star Army opened the inner city gate and rushed out. They have long-range, high-speed firearms. Our brothers guarding the outer city gate couldn't hold them off and have already retreated. We're requesting for backup. Reporting to the military supervisor, countless cavalrymen rushed out of the beginning city. They're coming towards us from both sides. We're requesting for backup. Reporting to the military supervisor, listening to the bad news one after another, Gao Yu's face turned red because of anger. Suddenly, he shouted, "Okay, stop talking, stop talking. Immediately organize people to hold on for me. Also, send someone to inform the 80,000 reinforcements. Tell them to speed up and come to join us under the beginning city. Also, send someone to look for General Fong Dingshan and request for cavalry support. Reinforcements." At this moment, Gao Yu already knew that the Five-Star Army had started their counterattack. Moreover, it was an unexpectedly strong counterattack. From the looks of it, they wouldn't be able to hold on for long. What he needed to do now was to request for reinforcements. As long as he could hold on until the reinforcements appeared, he could coordinate with them from the inside and outside and turn the tables around. How would Gao Yu know that the 80,000 infantry reinforcements he hoped for were blocked at the foot of Sion Mountain? They couldn't move forward. And right behind them, Commander Wu Hui of the 3rd Cavalry Division of a new Second Army was leading his cavalrymen all the way here. They had taken Baiming's army by surprise and inflicted heavy losses. According to Yang Chendong's battle plan, the 1st Cavalry Division and the 2nd Cavalry Division of the new Second Army stayed at the foot of Tulu City to prevent them from providing reinforcements again. The 3rd Cavalry Division and the 305th Cavalry Division of the Second Army would cut through the back and flank of the 80,000 Biming's reinforcements. They no longer had the ability to support them. On the other hand, the 100,000 elite Liaodong cavalrymen, led by Fong Dingshan, still had the strength. However, they weren't thinking about helping Gao Yu out of his predicament. Instead, they were thinking about how to destroy the heavy cavalry regiment led by wind-chasing wolf that they had surrounded. Fortunately, Yang Shindong's order was to surround and capture Biming's army. So, even though the offensive seemed fierce, Gao Yu wasn't in any danger for the time being. When he knew that the situation wasn't good, he first sent someone to ask for reinforcements. Then, he immediately called for General Weika of the Firearms Division and had him lead the firearms soldiers to the front line to resist the Five-Star Army's attacks. "Please don't worry, Army Supervisor," General Weika said confidently after receiving the mission. This time, he had brought over 10,000 firearms soldiers with him. Among them, there were quite a few soldiers who were armed with rifles. He believed that as long as he commanded them properly, even if they were facing fierce cavalry, they would be able to tear off a piece of flesh and let them know how powerful they were. Chapter 1329. Wei Ku was brimming with confidence, but it seemed that his luck wasn't too good. This time, he encountered the 5th Division of the Five-Star Army, which was also a firearm unit. However, when comparing the weapons of the two sides, the disparity was like heaven and earth. After the commander of the 5th Division, Xiao Yining, gave the order, the soldiers of the Cold Vanguard took the lead and defeated the Biming army outside the city. They quickly reclaimed the city gate. Soon after, the scouts reported that there were over 10,000 Northern Ming soldiers with firearms approaching them. Looking from afar, they seemed to be in good order and seemed to be in order. Biming firearms troops? Xiao Yining was stunned at first, but then he laughed out loud. Good. I was just about to ask them for a lesson. Tell the soldiers that their firearms can only shoot up to 120 meters. We will take care of them outside this range. Remember, injure them as much as possible. Don't kill them unless it's necessary. They're all Han like us. To become a soldier of the Cold Vanguard, the first requirement was to be a pure Han. This was something that was never discounted. As for the other foreign warriors, no matter how well they performed, or whether they had already converted to Han nationality, they had no chance of becoming a member of the Cold Front. It could be said that in the entire Five-Star Army, the Cold Vanguard had the purest composition. This was also because Yang Shundong didn't want other people to have advanced firearms. Otherwise, he would have to sleep with one eye open. Xiao Yining's order was passed down to the troops, and the few regimental commanders became extremely excited. They shouted loudly, "Commanders, it's time for us to practice our target practice. Next, we will compete with our marksmanship. Let's see who is more accurate and who can injure the most enemies." The 4 regiments actually treated the battlefield as a drill. They treated the enemies as targets. They didn't care who killed the most, but who injured the most. It was really strange. When Xiao Yining heard the report, he just smiled. He knew that the 5th Division spent a lot of time training and didn't have much time on the battlefield. They all needed to vent. "Men, bring me my gun. We're going as well," Xiao said excitedly to the officer in charge of firearms. Not long after, the cadres and soldiers of the division headquarters all carried their matching guns and rushed straight to the outer city wall of the first city. At this time, at the beginning of the city, there was already a group of soldiers from the Biming firearms camp rushing towards the city with guns in their hands. These Biming firearms battalion soldiers had all kinds of weapons in their hands. There were single-shot muskets, single-shot flintlocks, and 4-shot repeating pistols. Thanks to Yang Qindong, Biming had obtained a Type 81 automatic rifle. After countless craftsmen had disassembled and studied it, although they didn't know what a lathe was and couldn't successfully imitate it, the principles behind it had been researched by smart people, and the performance of firearms had improved. It was just that the ammunition was still iron bullets. Obviously, with their strength and technology, it was impossible to make real firearms bullets. Even so, this kind of improvement could be said to be obvious. At least, it was much better than in history. However, compared to the Cold Front soldiers, the difference was not small. Just in terms of the range of a firearm, the difference between them was like heaven and earth. For some reason, the five-star army had now eliminated the Type 81 automatic rifle. First of all, it was not easy to make a lathe. Since they were going to imitate it, they might as well imitate the Type 95 automatic rifle. Therefore, the Type 81 automatic rifle quickly left the stage and was mostly stored in Yang Chendong's warehouse. After the soldiers of the Cold Vanguard Division were all equipped with their Type 95 submachine guns, their firing range was around 400 meters. An effective range of 300 meters was not a problem. This time, the division headquarters had requested for the enemy to be 200 meters away, which undoubtedly increased their accuracy. This allowed Lu Wu to completely grasp the rhythm of the battle. When Xiao Yining arrived with the division headquarters, the soldiers of the other regiments had already repelled the Baiming army's first attack. Under the hail of bullets, more than 1,000 Baiming soldiers were thrown to the ground. The Cold Front soldiers very well carried out the orders of the division headquarters. They tried their best to injure the enemy instead of killing them. As a result, they killed fewer people and injured more people, which affected the morale of the soldiers even more. At this time, the thousands of northern Ming soldiers who were wailing at the foot of the city walls were an example. With the existence of these wounded soldiers, the other northern Ming soldiers turned pale with fright. They didn't know if they would end up like this the next time they charged. There were also some lucky Baiming soldiers who were rescued by their comrades and brought back to the barracks. However, they were still injured. Their cries of pain were heard by the other Baiming army soldiers at such a close distance. Because of this, the morale of the soldiers plummeted. Many of them showed fear in their eyes. Some were even tired of fighting. In contrast, the morale of the soldiers of the 5th Division was high. In the previous wave of attacks, not a single Baiming army soldier was able to get within 150 meters of them. This meant that their firearms did not pose any threat at all. Other than wasting some bullets, the entire 5th Division did not have a single injured soldier. The morale of the soldiers was getting higher and higher. Why is the division commander here? When Dang Liming saw Xiao Yining standing beside him, a confused expression appeared on his face. "All right, I'm here to train the division's marksmanship. I won't steal your credit." Seeing Dang Liming's intention, Xiao Yining shook his head helplessly and asked, "How is it? How are the results? Did we suffer any losses?" Knowing that Xiao Yining was not here to steal his credit, Dang Liming's expression immediately brightened. He patted his chest and promised, "Don't worry, the Baiming army will not be able to get close to us. Furthermore, we have the battlements to defend ourselves. They're standing on open ground. This is just a target practice. The soldiers will not be in any danger." "Good." Xiao Yining's face lit up. Every Cold Vanguard soldier was carefully selected from the Han people. Most of them were originally from Crimson Castle and Ryukyu Island. If there were any casualties, he would not be able to explain it to their families. Although it was inevitable that there would be casualties in war, Xiao Yining still hoped that there would be fewer deaths. This way, he would be able to explain it to his family. While the two were talking, the Baiming army's second charge began. Compared to the previous charge of thousands of soldiers, this time there were only a few hundred soldiers. It felt more like a probing attack. Damn it, how are we going to fight with so few people? Seeing that there were less than 1,000 soldiers, Dang Liming's face was filled with displeasure. Perhaps he wished that more than 10,000 soldiers from the Baiming firearms camp would charge forward. That way, he could kill to his heart's content. Xiao Yining, who also saw this scene, patted Dang Liming's head. "All right, the enemy has their own way of fighting. Immediately pass down the order. The 1st Regiment, 1st Battalion, and the division headquarters are responsible for shooting. Everyone else, stop." Since the number of enemies was small, it would be too wasteful if they fired all at once. It was better to fire one battalion at a time. That way, they could make a comparison and even have a competition on the battlefield to increase everyone's enthusiasm. Naturally, the division headquarters was included. This meant that they were mixing in personal goods. The other regimental commanders could not refuse. If they refused and angered Xiao Yining, he might not even give them a chance to kill the enemy. That would be unbearable. The competition between the battalions began. No matter how many soldiers from the bombing army came, the distance of 200 to 150 meters was their life and death line. No one could rush over, let alone launch a counterattack. Not only that, after a few short charges, more and more soldiers from the bombing army could run back without being injured. So much so that the wounded soldiers of the bombing army were thrown under the city gate tower. When everyone screamed in pain, the other bombing army soldiers did not dare to come forward. They were afraid that they would be one of them. The firearms camp did not play its role as expected. Instead, they were beaten into idiots. They did not even have the ability to fight back. This made Gao Yu, who was the army supervisor, very angry. However, what made him even more dissatisfied was that as the two cavalry armies under the new army continued to penetrate and cut through, he actually lost another 10,000 or so infantrymen at daybreak the next day. Moreover, most of them were injured soldiers. The number of people who truly died in battle was few and far between. It was precisely because there were too many injured soldiers in the barracks. It was more than a third of the total number of soldiers. The wails and screams of pain were endless. It was like purgatory on earth. It made people's faces change greatly. The morale of the soldiers was greatly shaken. At this moment, if there were no reinforcements, the more than 100,000 bombing army would collapse. Reinforcements? Where are the reinforcements? Looking back, Gao Yu's eyes flashed. At this moment, he finally knew the power of the five-star army. He also began to regret that he took the initiative to go out of the city to fight. If he stayed in Talis City, would it be much safer? Talis City. When the 80,000 reinforcements left the city, the commander of a new second army led the 1st Cavalry Division and the 2nd Cavalry Division to camp in the city. The military tents were connected to one another, and countless cavalrymen were constantly wandering around. This momentum frightened the northern Ming soldiers who were guarding the city. They also began to realize that the soldiers who had left the city were in danger. Knowing that the bombing army outside the city may be very dangerous, whether to kill them or not became the problem that the bombing General Zhang Peng needed to consider. He had climbed up the city tower and roughly looked at the five-star army cavalry below the city. There were only 10,000 people. If it was only a comparison of forces, they still had a certain advantage. However, war could not be calculated like this. It had to be considered from many aspects. For example, the other side was all cavalry. They could participate in the battle. However, a part of them needed to stay in the city to defend the city. They could not all go to the battlefield. This made the gap between the two sides shrink a lot. Chapter 1330. The five-star army was all cavalry, and they were infantry, which was a natural disadvantage. Outside of Talu City was a vast grassland. This kind of terrain was suitable for cavalry to spread out and attack. In contrast, infantry were at a disadvantage and lost for a while. Under all kinds of reasons, Zhang Peng came to a conclusion. If they went out of the city, there was a high chance that they would be defeated. If it didn't do well, they might even lose Talis City. Zhang Peng, who was shocked by this conclusion, was even less likely to send reinforcements out of the city. He just sent out several carrier pigeons to inform Gao Yu, who was at the beginning of the city, of his difficulties and predicament. At the same time, he also sent people to the Wanquan department in the rear. He wanted to report this matter to Admiral Shi Heng. It would be best if Shi Heng could stand up and lead the overall situation. That way, no matter what he did, his responsibility would become very small. Everyone had selfish motives. Knowing that it was very dangerous to go out of the city, Zhang Peng, who wanted to shirk his responsibility, thought of asking Shi Heng to come out. After sending out several carrier pigeons, he waited for news in the city. After a sleepless night, the next day at dawn, he didn't receive any news from his superior. A chilly arch guarding the city ran in front of him. General, quickly go and take a look. A lot of our defeated soldiers have come to the city. They're now being surrounded by the five-star army cavalry. What? Let's go. Hearing the change in the situation, Zhang Peng was shocked. He quickly went out of the mansion and went straight to the city tower. Running all the way to the top of the city tower, Jean Peng looked up and saw a lot of soldiers wearing Biming army uniforms being cut up by the 5-star army cavalry. They were surrounded and attacked with bows and arrows and sabers. In less than a quarter of an hour, at least several hundred Biming army soldiers were injured on the ground, wailing and screaming. "General, look!" the same colonel shouted. "There are nearly 1,000 of them, and they're asking if we should open the gates or not. Are we going to open them or not?" Yang Qi asked. "General, look! There's a group of about 1,000 of them, and they're calling out to us." Jean Peng stood behind the battlements and looked down. Sure enough, he saw a large group of people wearing Biming army uniforms arrive at the city gate. In comparison, their team still had some fighting power. At the very least, they were able to form a defensive formation. With their spears in front of them, they blocked the 5-star army's cavalry from approaching. Even so, from time to time, 1 or 2 soldiers would be injured and fall to the ground. Fortunately, the young general in command of this army had some ability. Once there was a problem, he could always let someone else fill the position. The order of the army was still maintained. However, everyone knew that they wouldn't be able to hold on for long if this continued. Therefore, the young general kept raising his head and cursing. "We're all comrades. Hurry up and open the city gates. Do you want to see so many of us die here?" Hearing these angry curses, the Biming army guarding the city naturally didn't dare to do anything in private. However, most people still focused their gazes on Jean Peng, waiting for this general to make a decision. At this moment, Jean Peng's face was extremely conflicted. When Gao Yu left, she handed Tao's city to him. That was a kind of trust, but also a kind of responsibility. Logically speaking, his main task was to defend the city and prevent it from being occupied by the 5-star army. Once the city gates were opened, there would definitely be a certain amount of danger. However, looking at the other soldiers, if he really didn't save them, it would definitely chill the morale of the army. It would also be a heavy blow to his authority as a commander. If he didn't handle it well, the morale of the army would be in chaos. At that time, when he gave a military order, how many people would obey? "General, please make a decision." At this moment, several Kiliarchs gathered around Jean Peng. Their faces looked like they were willing to make a decision. They were all soldiers. Anyone could encounter danger. If they didn't save them now, then when they were in trouble one day, wouldn't others treat them the same way? In the long run, several young generals certainly hoped that Jean Peng would help. This was not only saving others, but also saving themselves. Originally, Jean Peng was very hesitant. Now that several Kiliarchs were pressuring him, the balance in his heart began to tilt. He asked in a deep voice, "If the city gates are opened, will the 5-star army's cavalry charge into the city?" This meant that Jean Peng was going to compromise. After hearing this, the other young generals' faces flashed with joy. A quick-witted Chiliarch quickly replied, "They shouldn't. We can use bows and arrows to attack. When the time comes, as long as the city gates are opened fast enough, the 5-star army won't be able to charge into the city." "That's right. General, look. The 5-star army's cavalry doesn't seem to be paying attention to us. They probably don't think that we will open the city gates. There aren't many cavalry here, so our safety shouldn't be a problem." Another Chiliarch pointed below the city and explained to Jean Peng. The other Kiliarchs also quickly explained the problem from various angles. All of them expressed the same meaning. That was, as long as they moved fast enough and were prepared, the 5-star army wouldn't be able to enter the city. They wouldn't be able to take any advantage. Seeing that everyone was so confident, Jean Peng took a deep breath and said, "Okay, this general believes you. Since that's the case, prepare enough bows and arrows. We will open the city gates in a while, but we must be fast. We can't let the enemy cavalry enter the city." Yes, Jean Peng finally made a decision. The other Kiliarchs were also very happy. At this moment, they all cupped their fists and agreed. After all, their superior was benevolent. Just this point alone wasn't a bad thing for everyone. With this order, many archers appeared on the city walls of Tulu City. The city gates were also opened from the inside. Over 100 northern Ming soldiers took this opportunity to rush out of the city gates. They shouted to the 1,000 or so comrades who were standing behind them, Quickly retreat. We have archers to cover you." "Many thanks." The Chiliarch, who had been cursing nonstop, had a look of excitement on his face. He immediately ordered his soldiers to retreat into the open city gates. Behind them, the 5-star Army's cavalry that wanted to approach were forced back by the thousands of arrows from the city walls. It was like a net of arrows, making it impossible for anyone to enter. Ha, it's done." Jean Peng, who was nervously staring at the city walls, couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief when he saw the 1,000 or so soldiers from the Baiming army being rescued. No matter what, saving 1,000 people could be considered a meritorious service. At the same time, he would be able to find out what had happened outside from these people. He would be able to find out why the 5-star Army's cavalry had appeared and why the Baiming army had been defeated. Before Jean Peng could finish his sigh of relief, and before he could ask the retreating soldiers what happened outside, the situation on the battlefield suddenly changed. The 5-star Army's cavalry that was still far away suddenly gave up on surrounding the Baiming soldiers. Instead, they angrily rushed towards the city gates that were slowly closing. Are they crazy? Isn't it too late to come now? On top of the city walls, when they saw the 5-star Army's cavalry rushing towards them, the Baiming army's Chiliarchs on top of the city walls laughed. They laughed at the stupidity of the 5-star Army. But soon, a piece of news hit their faces like a slap, causing their complexion to instantly change. Not good. The Baiming army that we rescued suddenly betrayed us. They injured our soldiers who were guarding the city gates. They occupied the place and guarded the gate. We can't get close for a while. What? Several Chiliarchs were surprised. They were all confused. They didn't understand why their own people would hurt their own people. They just saved these people. On the other hand, Jean Peng suddenly thought of something after being shocked for a short while. He shouted loudly, "I'm afraid that those people aren't our comrades at all. They're the 5-star Army in disguise. Damn it, we've been tricked. Quick, send troops down and take back the city gate. Close it. Be quick." At this time, Jean Peng shouted in hindsight. However, how could it be so easy to turn the tables? Under the 5-star Army's long preparation, specifically under the new 2nd Army's commander she's planning, the moment they opened the city gates, they were doomed to fail. Just last night, there were cavalry scouts who reported that they discovered many defeated Baiming army infantrymen in the direction of Sion Mountain. They asked for instructions on what to do. She was currently in the large tent when he was woken up. After hearing this news, he knew that the development of the war had already deviated from its original path. According to Yang Shindong's previous analysis, once the war started, the new 2nd Army's 2 cavalry divisions would face the danger of being attacked from 2 sides by the Baiming army. Because of this, she decided to defend this place no matter what. With the cavalry he brought, he still had a certain advantage. However, when he really brought his troops to Tulu City, the Baiming army's reaction was a bit unexpected. The Baiming army inside the city actually didn't make any movements. They just stood on the city gate tower, allowing them to set up formations and set up tents. This was because the Baiming army was scared. When he saw this change, she quickly made the decision to adapt to the changes on the battlefield. Perhaps the previous military plans were done well, but a general who couldn't adapt to changes wasn't a general. He was just a machine. From the possibility of being attacked from 2 sides to the current Baiming army holding back their troops, the new 2nd Army's 2 cavalry divisions were safe. However, she wasn't satisfied with this result. He already began to boldly imagine if he could find an opportunity to capture Tulu City and completely cut off the several 100,000 Baiming army's path of retreat. If he had made this suggestion before, it clearly wouldn't have been appropriate. But now, the cowardly behavior of the 50,000 infantrymen in Tulu City made she see hope. It was just that he couldn't immediately find a breakthrough point. The scouts who came to report in the middle of the night opened up a window in Shi B's heart, allowing him to see an opportunity and hope to attack Tulu City. She be called over the 1st Cavalry Division's commander, Qiao Chao, and the 2nd Cavalry Division's commander, Li Jun. After a round of discussion, the three of them decided to disguise themselves as the Biming army to trick the enemy into opening the city gates. Chapter 1331. In order to win this battle in one fell swoop, the commander of the 1st Cavalry Division, Xiao Chao, volunteered to take on the task of luring the enemy to open the gate. He personally selected 1,000 Han soldiers and changed into the Biming army's uniform. Taking advantage of the darkness, they left the camp and mingled with the Biming army that was retreating in defeat from the direction of Sion Mountain. It must be said that the Biming army was indeed made up of new recruits. Normally, they looked rather powerful, but when they encountered a sudden attack, especially when they heard the rumbling of the 5-star army's warhorses, their fighting spirit quickly collapsed. A portion of them didn't even have time to brandish their weapons and arrows before running back. They had escaped from Tulu City. In many people's hearts, they believed that it would be safe to escape back here. After all, with the city walls as a shield, even if it was only psychologically, it could still give people a sense of comfort. In addition, it was nighttime. The addition of Qiao Chao's 1,000 soldiers didn't cause any chaos at all. When daybreak arrived, Qiao Chao led his 1,000 soldiers and intentionally began to approach Tulu City's gates. Under the new 2nd Army's deliberate carelessness, they were the first to arrive in front of the city gates. As expected, they attracted Zhangping's attention. Because of this, the city gates were opened. This was tantamount to giving Qiao Chao an opportunity to display his abilities. Speaking of which, Qiao Chao wasn't an ordinary person. He was an outstanding student from a Yang Family Academy in Crimson City. After graduation, he entered the Ministry of Public Security and completed some bandit suppression missions. Later, because of his outstanding performance, he was transferred to the Army headquarters as a combat staff officer. His performance was also outstanding. This time, there was a problem with the new 2nd Army. All of the division-level officers needed to be replaced. Xiao Chao obtained this opportunity. Based on his performance, he was selected to enter the new 2nd Army and become the commander of the 1st Cavalry Division. Everything seemed to be going smoothly, but only Qiao Chao himself knew that his military contributions were still too little. If it wasn't because the new 2nd Army had many problems and was only responsible for defending the city and transporting supplies, the position of commander wouldn't have been his. It was precisely because everyone looked down on the new 2nd Army that he picked up a loophole. Now, the new 2nd Army had a combat mission, and it was personally given by the 6th Young Master, the principal. Just based on this, Qiao Chao decided to perform well. He could not embarrass the principal, and he had to show his best side. He took the initiative to fight and got the chance to lure the enemy to open the city gate. After careful planning and good performance, the city gates were finally opened. When Xiao Chao appeared here with a spear in his hand, it gave birth to a feeling that one man could hold the pass against 10,000 men. As long as he was still alive, he would never allow the Biming army to take back the gate. Soldiers, kill. We must hold on until the cavalry arrives. We can do it. Xiao Chao shouted loudly to encourage his soldiers, raising their morale. Below the city gate tower, more and more Biming army were rushing over. General Zhang Peng had issued a death order. No matter what, they had to take back the city gate. For this, they didn't hesitate to pay any price. Zhang Peng was really anxious. Originally, he wanted to save people out of kindness. Of course, he also wanted to make a contribution. But who would have thought that the people he saved were the enemy? This was a serious dereliction of duty. If he couldn't drive these people out, once the city gate was broken, he would be the biggest sinner. Zhang Peng's desperate counterattack suddenly increased the pressure on Xiao Chao. He and his soldiers had no choice but to start a massacre. They weren't just hurting people, they were killing people. When their military uniforms were dyed red with blood, the corpses of Biming soldiers were piled up outside the city gate. This kind of ruthlessness finally shocked the Biming army, who were preparing to attack. Although these Biming army had also been trained, this was their first time on the battlefield. When the flesh and blood scattered all over the ground, the smell of blood assailed their nostrils. Many people vomited because of this. This was different from their usual training. It was also different from the fights between the common people. This was a battle of life and death. Once they rushed forward, they would often fight to the death. No one would not cherish their own life. The only difference was whether it was worth it or not. They only had limited military pay. Just because of the general's order, they had to pay with their own life. After they died, it was difficult to get any pension policy. After they died, their family would not be taken care of. So, why should they be bathed in blood and kill? Where did their hot blood come from? In contrast, Cao Cao and his soldiers didn't have these worries. The Yangtze government had a very sound pension policy for the soldiers. If you died in battle, your family would benefit. If you died because of meritorious service, your family would also follow you for a lifetime of glory. There were many benefits to meritorious service. If you died in battle, your family would also benefit a lot. This made everyone have no worries. Using their lives on the battlefield became a matter of course. When Xiao Qiao and his men were covered in blood as if they had walked out of hell, they came to the front of the Biming army and shouted, "Who else is there?" The Biming army involuntarily began to retreat. This was a fear that came from the depths of their bones. "Go, go, go. Comrades, get out of the way. Our cavalry is coming." Just as Qiao Qiao and his soldiers were confronting the Biming army, behind them, the cavalry brothers of the new Second Army finally broke through the rain of arrows and entered the city gate. When the cavalry arrived, the situation on the battlefield changed dramatically. The cavalry borrowed the momentum of their horses. When they casually swung their sabers, they could carry a force of several hundred jin. Wherever they went, anyone who tried to resist was either cut in half or heavily injured by the charge of the warhorse. This was the advantage cavalry had over infantry. The arrival of the cavalry meant that Tulu City was about to change hands. Run! Seeing that the cavalry had already begun to kill, the Biming army, standing at the front, fell in a short time. The rest of the Biming army scattered like birds and beasts after an unknown person shouted. They immediately fled in all directions. Zhang Peng, who was standing at the back of the army, saw everything clearly. He staggered and almost fainted on the ground. It was the personal guard beside him who supported him and advised, "General, the situation has changed. We should run. The strength of the 5-star Army's cavalry is not something we can resist. Even if we don't open the city gate, they will find a way to open it. Let's go." The words of comfort had some effect. Zhang Peng, who was already out of his wits, kept nodding. "Okay, let's retreat. Let's retreat." Zhang Peng escaped. Taking advantage of the chaos when the cavalry entered the city, he escaped with 10,000 infantry. They ran straight to the capital head behind them. This was also the only northern Ming army that managed to escape from this battle. Following Zhang Peng's escape, Tulu City changed hands without anyone commanding it. She led the cavalry into the city and saw piles of provisions and gold and silver in the large warehouse. These were the provisions Biming army had prepared for their 400,000-strong army. Now, they had benefited the 5-star army. She entered the city under the protection of a group of cavalry and entered Shihang's courtyard. Then, she sent a telegram to Yang Chendong. In this battle, she once again proved herself. It also proved that the new Second Army was a strong army that could fight. They completed their mission beyond expectations and made the impossible possible. They seized Tulu City and completely cut off the Biming army's path of retreat. When Yang Chendong received the telegram, he couldn't help but clap. That's right, Shirlio's performance was very good, especially his reaction on the spot. "Come, everyone in the army report to the new Second Army for commendation. Also, inform Shirlu to report all the meritorious officials in this battle." Yang Chendong's mood improved greatly because of this. His expression no longer as cold as before. Speaking of which, Yang Chendong's mood wasn't that good. It was all because of the telegram sent by the heavy cavalry regiment. They were surrounded by Baiming's Liaodong cavalry. They were determined to live and die with the enemy. This telegram clearly stated their situation, but at the same time, it could also be said to be a resolute telegram. How could Yang Qindong agree that a heavy cavalry regiment was about to be wiped out? He immediately replied with a telegram, asking the regiment commander to hold on until reinforcements arrived. At the same time, he reported the situation to the 1st Cavalry Division, the 101st Regiment, and the division that were looking for Baiming's Liaodong cavalry on the battlefield. He asked them to quickly provide support to the heavy cavalry regiment. After sending these telegrams, the news of Xi's victory came, making the angry Yang Qindong feel much better. Seeing that the new Second Army had made great contributions, Yang Qindong also felt a surge of hot blood in his body. He glanced at Beta Persei beside him and suddenly asked heroically, "Beta Persei, do you dare to fight the Liaodong cavalry with the young master?" Beta Persei was also a hot-blooded youth. After hearing this, his eyes lit up. He instinctively wanted to agree, but his mouth opened and he became hesitant. Of course, he himself wanted to fight Baiming's Liaodong cavalry. This army was also famous. Beta Persei had long wanted to deal with them and let them know that there was always someone better. This was also what any 5-star army soldier wanted to do. But this matter involved Yang Qindong. It was completely different. As for how important Yang Qindong was now, there was no need to say more. It was not an exaggeration to say that if something happened to him now, Yang Xie would definitely be in chaos. Even a 5-star army would fall apart in an instant. In other words, at this time, anyone in Yang Xie could have a problem, but Yang Qindong couldn't. Now, they only had 2,000 black cavalry soldiers with them. If they went to fight Baiming's Liaodong cavalry with this small number of people, it would not be killing people, but arrogantly courting death. No. Beta Persei shook his head firmly. Why not? Although Yang Qindong knew the answer would be like this, he was still a little reluctant. Don't you have the guts? You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.